Welcome to Sherlock Shadow Channel, where every story hides a secret. Grab your coffee, sit back, and dive into a world of twists and turns. Tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city and country in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share the thrill with fellow mystery lovers. Let the adventure begin. Hercule Poirot and the Case of the Disappearing Silverware. Chapter 1. The Disappearing Silverware. I write these lines by the glow of a single taper, my nerves still tingling from the curious summons that brought us here. It was but yesterday morning when Brown, my ever-faithful valet, presented me with a small card edged in purple, sealed with the Pembroke crest. The exquisite script of Lady Marjorie Pembroke implored the immediate presence of Monsieur Hercule Poirot, on account of an incident of such perplexity that your little grey cells alone may unravel it. Naturally, I seized my coat and rushed to inform Poirot, whose eyes, bright as polished jet, sparkled with that peculiar anticipation he reserves for the most subtle of enigmas. By midday, we found ourselves beneath the vaulted ceiling of the Pembroke Estate's grand ballroom. Sunlight fractured through stained glass panels, casting jewel-toned patterns across the polished marble floor. At the room's heart stood a table of grand proportions, draped in ivory damask and set for a luncheon of extraordinary formality. Yet, where one expected rows of ornate silverware gleaming beside each place setting, only 2 complete sets remained. The rest, scores of forks, spoons, and knives, had vanished overnight. A tremor ran through the assembled household staff as Poirot and I crossed the threshold. Lady Marjorie, pale of cheek and trembling of hand, greeted us with a curtsy so deep it threatened to topple her delicate balance. Behind her, the Marquis of Pembroke, tall, astute, and dressed in morning coat, watched us with keen, discerning eyes. On his right stood Sir Reginald Blythe, a retired army colonel whose uniformed bearing still bore the rigid imprint of long service. To their left were Miss Celia Marchmont, the young ward of the Pembrokes, whose quiet dignity seemed at odds with her startled gaze, and Mr. Alfred Jervis, an appraiser of antique silver whose mild countenance betrayed both professional curiosity and personal and pressing financial burdens. Poirot paused at the table's edge, steepled his small hands beneath his waxed moustache, and murmured, "Mon ami, observe these indentations in the damask." With that, he shrugged back one corner of the tablecloth to reveal faint, parallel scores upon the wood, marks as though a heavy tray had been dragged roughly. "These marks were made quite recently," he continued, "for the patina of the scratches is still fresh." I bent to examine them in turn. Indeed, the lines were crisp, almost raw, evidence that whatever caused them had been pressed and rolled only hours ago. But why remove silverware so carelessly, and why take only a household's most commonplace items rather than the prized heirlooms locked away in the family vault? Before I could voice my question, Poirot's gaze swept upward to the tall windows. "Note the hinges here," he said, pointing to one set. "They bear a fine dust, undisturbed. Yet on this one," he touched another, "the dust is brushed aside in 3 neat arcs." His finger traced small footprints of clearance, as though the sash had been opened, then closed, by someone cautious of leaving fingerprints, literally or metaphorically. Lady Marjorie's maid, Miss Whittaker, stepped forward. Her gloved fingers trembled as she lifted her cap. "Beg pardon, monsieur," she said softly, "but the windows were all locked last night. We performed our usual rounds. Not a soul entered the ballroom after dinner." Poirot inclined his head. "Merci, mademoiselle. And yet here we stand, confronted with a disappearance that defies the ordinary thief's impulse." He turned to the Marquis. "Lord Pembroke, Might I inquire whether any guests departed during the late hours, perhaps to fetch something or to entertain a personal matter? The Marquis folded his long hands. Only my cousin, Lady Blanche Ashcroft, but she retired early with a headache. My butler confirmed her door remained closed. Ah, Poirot said. A headache, yes, and yet headaches can be an excellent cover. He levelled a witty glance at the Marquess, who raised an eyebrow in reply. We must examine every possibility, n'est-ce pas? For the simplest motive sometimes hides the deepest deceit. Sir Reginald cleared his throat. Surely, Monsieur Poirot, silverware is of little value to a common criminal. It sells for pennies at best. If one sought profit, one would not risk detection for such trifles. Poirot smiled, his moustache twitching. Precisely, Colonel, precisely. Which is why we must consider motives beyond mere pecuniary gain. Perhaps the thief seeks to unsettle the household, to convey a threat, or to distract attention from some other mischief. He paused, surveying each face in turn as though appraising hidden currents beneath calm waters. Miss Marchmont, her dark eyes luminous with concern, spoke at last. I confess I do not understand why anyone would do such a thing. Our family silver, our history, matters to us all. Her voice quivered slightly, betraying an anxiety she tried to conceal. Poirot placed a reassuring hand on her gloved shoulder. Madam, rest assured, no family heirloom is truly lost while the mind remains alert. Now, he continued, stepping back to the two remaining place settings, let us note the pattern, which pieces remain and which have vanished. I watched as Poirot lifted a knife, its handle etched with a fleur-de-lis, and set it aside. A spoon followed, then a fork. One by one he listed the survivors. 2 dessert forks, 3 soup spoons, a lone fish knife. The missing pieces formed a curious imbalance. Why leave so little? Poirot allowed the silence to deepen before he spoke again. Mon ami, the pattern is that of an incomplete meal. One interrupted. These pins of silver are symbols, cutlery for courses yet to be served. The thief may wish to interrupt a forthcoming gathering, yet no feast is planned until tonight's dinner. Tonight's guest list is intimate. The Marquess, Lady Blanche, Sir Reginald, Miss Marchmont, Mr. Jervis, and myself. Perhaps the thief intends to raise tension before that supper. He tapped his chin thoughtfully. Or perhaps they wish to ensure someone at that table remains silent. A hush fell. Even the distant chime of the chapel clock seemed muted. I shivered, though the air was still warm. The puzzle lay before us. Not a question of who had the skill to steal, but why they chose this symbolic ploy, and which among these gathering eyes felt the chill of exposure. Poirot cleared his throat. For now I shall require access to the servants' quarters, the family vault, and the guest rooms. We must examine footprints, dust, and, above all, alibis. Each person here must recount their movements from dusk until the moment the silverware was discovered missing. Only by knitting these threads can we reveal the pattern. Lady Marjorie rose to curtsy again, more composed now. Monsieur Poirot, we are in your hands. Pray discover the truth. As I followed Poirot toward the corridor, I cast a glance back at the vacant places on that formidable table, an unspoken invitation to suspense, poised and waiting. Little did I suspect how deep the game would run, nor the lengths to which hidden motives would twist the simplest of thefts into a matter of life, death, and honor. But Poirot's eyes, steely and alive, promised that no contradiction would remain concealed, and no deception would withstand his little grey cells. Chapter 2. The First Clues. I rose with the dawn's first light. keenly aware that the events of last evening would cast their long shadows over the household until this mystery was resolved. Over tea in the library, I found Poirot already at work, his little grey cells in full motion. He had requested that Miss Whittaker, the Pembrokes' head maid, and Mr. Cartwright, the butler, join us with full accounts of their nocturnal rounds. Miss Whittaker's hands trembled slightly as she arranged her notes on the low walnut table. Monsieur Poirot, I last passed through the ballroom at 10:15 p.m. I ensured the windows were bolted, the doors locked, and the silverware properly laid for breakfast the next morning. At 11 p.m., I made my final check, found everything in order, save for Lady Blanche's door, which appeared ajar. I pushed it closed and returned upstairs. Poirot inclined his head, steepling his fingers. "And you noted no signs of disturbance?" "None, monsieur. The silver was untouched." Mr. Cartwright cleared his throat. At midnight, I carried the tray of late-night refreshments through that same corridor. Miss Whittaker had already gone to bed. I passed beneath the ballroom windows and saw no movement. The corridor was silent. "Merci," Poirot said. He looked to me. "Hastings, what of the footprints in the rose garden? I instructed our gardener to sweep the paths last night, yet I discerned faint impressions leading to the conservatory door." I nodded. Indeed. When I ventured outside after our arrival, I noticed a single line of footprints in the soft earth, size 8, I would estimate, with a slightly rounded heel. They led from the rose garden to the little side door of the conservatory, then vanished. No return tracks. The soil within the glass house, however, bore a few scrapes, as though someone had knelt to peer in, then retreated. Poirot's moustache quivered with delight. "Now we have our first clues. Let us examine the path outside." We retraced the footprints, stepping carefully so as not to obliterate them. The garden paths were damp from overnight sprinklers, but the gardener had confirmed they were inactive until morning. The prints, therefore, were fresh, made after 10, before the frost melted. "The shoe," said Poirot, bending to examine the heel, "is polished, likely belonging to someone of station. Note, Hastings, how the prints are shallow at first, then deepen as the walker pressed forward, indicating haste or perhaps a burden." He pointed to a slight smear of mud on the doorstep. Yet the person did not enter. They merely approached, studied the room's interior, then departed. I peered through the conservatory window, potted palms, a small marble fountain, and the afternoon's lunch table set for tea. But nothing seemed amiss. No broken glass, no displaced botanicals. Perhaps they sought not to enter, but to observe the guests' comings and goings, I ventured. Poirot nodded. Or to discover if the silver was brought here for cleaning before removal. Returning to the ballroom, we began a systematic inspection of the silver-laden sideboard. Each piece bore minute hallmarks and slight variations in monogramming. Poirot lifted a setting of fish forks and turned them over in the light. "Observe, Hastings. One of these bears a faint discoloration near the tines, a subtle tarnish that was not buffed away with the rest. And here," he tapped a single knife. "The monogram is slightly askew, MP instead of PM. Those letters, I believe, belong to another set entirely." I studied the knife. "You mean someone slipped in a mismatched piece, then removed the correct ones?" "Exactly. A psychological trick, implying the theft is random, when in truth it is deliberate. The culprit wishes us to look for an outsider, when in fact the guilty party is quite familiar with these initials." At that moment, Miss Marchmont entered, her eyes wide. Monsieur Poirot, I apologize for interrupting, but I thought you should know. I found this in the East Wing corridor. She held out a folded scrap of paper, edges singed and creased. Poirot took it with gentleness. Unfolding the note, he read aloud, "You will regret tonight's dinner. Some silver must remain to remind you of what is lost." He paused, then pressed the paper under a lens. The handwriting is deliberate, but tremulous. Notice the loop on the R, too ornate for a masculine hand of distinction. The scorch marks indicate the writer burned the message quickly, perhaps from impatience. Miss Marchmont's lip trembled. But who would threaten us so brazenly? Ah, that is the question. Poirot folded the note and placed it in an envelope. "We will send it to Madame Climene, the graphologist in London. She shall reveal whether it is penned by a lady of society or one unaccustomed to such flourishes." We spent the better part of the morning questioning the principal guests in turn. Sir Reginald Blythe displayed a brusque impatience, insisting that the matter was beneath him. When pressed about his movements, he admitted to wandering the grounds for fresh air, but admitted no details of time. The Marquess demurred politely, claiming to have retired early with a headache, yet his eyes flickered when Poirot noted the discarded cognac glass in his sitting room, a glass that had not been there the previous evening, according to the butler. Mr. Jervis was the most intriguing. The silver expert's face betrayed no surprise at the theft, rather he gazed with professional curiosity. "Silver, you see, is art in its purest form," he said, "and when pieces vanish, it becomes performance, an inverted exhibition, one that begs to be studied." His fingers toyed with the chain of his pocket watch as he spoke. Poirot watched him closely, noting the faint crease of worry upon his brow. Miss Marchmont remained composed, though I saw her hands tighten over her embroidery frame. Lady Marjorie hovered anxiously in the doorway, offering tea and small comforts, but her pallor suggested fear rather than hospitality. By midday, Poirot convened us once more in the ballroom. The table stood as a silent accusation. 2 settings of silver, countless missing. He recounted each observation, the footprints, the mismatched knife, the scrawled note, the burnt edges. "Mes amis," he said, "we have at least 4 threads. The outsider who watched through the glass house, the intimate knowledge of the monograms, the handwriting of a lady, and the unaccounted cognac glass. Now our task is to weave these into a single fabric of truth." Sir Reginald cleared his throat. "I still maintain someone seeks to distract us from more serious business." Poirot offered a small bow. "Perhaps, Colonel. Yet in Christie's world, no thread is without purpose. We must follow each until it leads us to the heart of deceit." As I left the ballroom to fetch our luncheon, I sensed that each suspect carried within them a silent storm. Poirot's. Deductions had unearthed more questions than answers, and the atmosphere at Styles Manor thickened with unspoken fears. The first clues had been discovered, but the labyrinth had only begun to reveal its turning passages, and in that hush I felt certain of one truth. When the little grey cells speak, even silence must give way. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. By mid-afternoon, a heavy hush had settled over Styles Manor. The corridors felt narrower, and the sunlight that filtered through leaded panes seemed subdued, as though the house itself were holding its breath. Poirot summoned each principal character to assemble in the morning room. Lady Marjorie Pembroke, the Marquess, Sir Reginald, Miss Marchmont, and Mr. Jervis. Even Miss Whittaker and Mr. Cartwright were invited to stand by, their loyalty to the household tempered by increasing anxiety. I took my place beside Poirot. He motioned gracefully for each person to be seated in the semicircle of high-backed chairs. "Mes amis," he began, "we convene not as judge and jury, but as fellow seekers of truth. Each of you bears a piece of the puzzle that has become this strange affair of the disappearing silverware. We shall proceed in turn, unraveling your backgrounds, relationships, and possible motives, so that no subtle thread remains hidden. Let us begin." Lady Marjorie, slender and gracious even in distress, stood first. She smoothed her embroidered skirt and said, "I have lived at Styles since my marriage 5 years ago. Well, it is not widely known. Once felt certain that my husband favoured his cousin Blanche over me. I confided only in my maid, Miss Whittaker, of my fears. Yet my love for Pembroke remained steadfast." Her voice wavered. She continued, "Last night I entertained doubts. Had the theft been orchestrated to humiliate me, to draw me into public scandal?" She paused, pressing her gloved hands to her bosom. "But I would never suspect Blanche. She is delicate, prone to fainting. She could never commit such a bold act." Poirot inclined his head. "Thank you, madame. And you suspect no one within these walls?" Lady Marjorie cast a troubled glance at each face in turn. "I pray you understand. My heart resists the thought. Yet these are distressing times." Next, the Marquis of Pembroke rose. Tall and austere, he folded his long fingers as he spoke. "I inherited this estate under strict conditions. My late uncle, who passed 3 years ago, stipulated that the family silver must remain intact, lest the inheritance be forfeit. I am forced to disclose this now, because I fear the theft may jeopardize our legacy. Yet, I have done nothing to compromise the collection." He turned his gaze to his cousin, Miss Marchmont, "And as for Celia, I have provided for her since her parents' demise. I bear no ill will toward her. On the contrary, I treat her as my own." Miss Marchmont's eyes softened, but she said nothing. Sir Reginald Blythe, an imposing figure draped in well-pressed tweeds, cleared his throat. "I served in India for 2 decades, where one learns to guard one's possessions against both enemy and friend. When I retired, I purchased my silver here, a set of 3 forks I prize above all. I keep them in my room for sentimental reasons. I had no quarrel with your family, Marquis, and would never steal on someone else's property, but I cannot say I was entirely unbiased when bidding on that silver. One's attachments can cloud judgment, oui?" He gave a rueful half-smile. Poirot nodded, making a note. Mr. Alfred Jervis, adjusting his pince-nez, leaned forward. "I am an expert in antique silver. I appraised the Pembroke collection last month. It is not merely wealth to me, but art. I admit I was fascinated by those monograms. I even suggested to Lady Marjorie that a few pieces be loaned to the Victoria and Albert Museum for a winter exhibition. She declined, citing family sentiment. Perhaps that suggestion sowed a seed of resentment." He tapped the arm of his chair thoughtfully. "I assure you, however, I would never steal to prove a point. My reputation depends on trust." Miss Whittaker, her cheeks flushed, spoke softly. "I have served Lady Pembroke since she arrived here. I care for her as my own cousin might. Last night, I heard movements outside the ballroom door around 10:15, but I dared not investigate alone. I was afraid it might be a prowler. I stayed in the kitchen until morning." Mr. Cartwright, ever the epitome of composure, added with quiet authority, "I have managed this house for 20 years. I know its secrets better than anyone. Yet even I cannot fathom why someone would take common silver. It must be more than theft. It must be message. Poirot tapped his cane lightly. Excellent, mes amis. You have each declared your relation to them silver, and to one another. Now please share any hidden tensions, unspoken alliances, or recent grievances you may have felt within this circle. He looked at Lady Blanche Ashcroft, who sat pale and withdrawn in a corner. Until now, she had not been summoned. With a faint curtsy, she rose. I beg your pardon. I have remained apart because I was unwell. I suffer from migraines, which often strike without warning. Last night I sought solitude in the conservatory to allow the cool air to ease my pain. She shivered at the memory. I heard nothing unusual until morning. Poirot's eyes softened. Thank you, Lady Blanche. Your health comes first. Yet I should note, you mentioned the conservatory. That is the same door through which we discovered footprints. Interesting, non? Lady Blanche's eyes widened, but she offered no further remark. Poirot then addressed Miss Marchmont. And you, mademoiselle, what of your own history? You arrived here only 2 months ago, and have since become inseparable from Lady Marjorie. You have the look of someone well-bred. Yet every newcomer introduces unknown variables. Miss Marchmont's lips curved into a slight smile. I was orphaned in a carriage accident, she began. The Marquis took me in as his ward. I have no fortune, but I have loyalty. I would die to protect this family. I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, I wish for no scandal. She paused, then added, as though in confession, I once read of a series of thefts in Paris, silver, jewellery, committed by a thief who left no trace. My mind has been in Paris too long. Poirot rose and circled the room slowly. Now you have met your fellow suspects, and the stage is set. Each of you had opportunity, each had motive of some kind, and each carries secrets. Yet only one among you plotted this caper, the others, innocent. His gaze settled on Mr. Jervis. A scholar of silver, a lover of its beauty, yet you spoke of seed sowing. I wonder whether that seed bore fruit too dark to be undone. Mr. Jervis's face paled, but he bowed. I have nothing to add, monsieur. Poirot turned to me. Hastings, ask the Marquis to provide a list of recent visitors to Styles Manor. Friends, tradesmen, grooms, anyone who might have knowledge of the collection. As I rose, the Marquis consulted his pocket ledger. Miss Whittaker hovered to take notes, her pen scratching timidly. The air vibrated with tension as alliances formed in the silence. Lady Marjorie casting motherly glances at Miss Marchmont, Sir Reginald's stern gaze sweeping the room, Blanche's fragile composure, and Jervis's inscrutable mask. Poirot watched them all, his moustache quivering with anticipation. We have a closed circle, he said in a low voice, barely to me. None can enter nor exit without detection. The missing silverware must remain within these walls, and within these hearts. As the Marquis finished his inventory, I sensed that this gathering, intended to reveal character, had further enshrouded motives in mystery. Each introduction had planted new seeds of suspicion. And as the late afternoon shadows lengthened across the patterned rug, I knew that the true gathering, the gathering of clues, had only just begun. Soon we would probe deeper. The false lead hinted at last night's cognac glass, the second mystery yet to unfold, and the psychological maneuvers Poirot would employ. But for now, the suspects stood arrayed before us, some open, some guarded, none yet unmasked. The game moved into its next phase, and I could feel the thrill of pursuit quicken in Poirot's eyes. The silences between our words were laden with promise, a promise that every hidden face would soon be revealed. Chapter 4. Poirot's Assessment. As the late afternoon sun softened beyond the estate's hedgerows, Poirot summoned us once more to the grand ballroom. The two solitary place settings of silver gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, their empty neighbours haunting the table like missing teeth in a broken jaw. Each suspect hovered at the perimeter, an uneasy constellation of guilt and innocence. Poirot cleared his throat, and even the ticking of the great French clock stilled. "Mes amis," he began, voice resonant, "you have heard my preliminary inquiries. Yet I must conclude that the official theory that a common thief struck under the cover of darkness is untenable." His dark eyes swept first to the Marquess, then to each in turn. The precision of the monograms, the careful selection of pieces, the deliberate message. These speak of someone intimately familiar with this household and its treasures, not a prowler, but an insider. Lady Marjorie's brow knit in dismay. "Then you believe one of us plotted this, Monsieur Poirot?" "Indubitably," he replied, "and I mean no insult. Rather, I wish to unmask the hidden motive." He tapped his cane lightly on the marble floor. "Let us consider. Why remove silverware so common, and yet replace some pieces with others? Why burn the threatening note rather than deliver it plainly? And why test the waters by probing the conservatory window rather than enter outright?" He paused, letting each question hang like a suspended bell. I observed the group's shifting expressions. Sir Reginald's jaw tightened. Miss Marchmont's gloved fingers clenched. Mr. Jervis adjusted his watch chain with a flicker of nervousness. Even Lady Blanche's fine complexion had taken on a quiver of colour. Poirot smiled as though enjoying a private joke. "Before we proceed to individual interviews," he continued, "I shall conduct a careful examination of the ballroom itself. Hastings, will you assist me?" I nodded and followed him to the sideboard. He began systematically lifting each remaining utensil, inspecting it under the crystal light. "Notice here," he said, holding up a soup spoon. "The underside bears minute abrasions, likely from polishing cloth fibres caught on the silver. But here," he pointed to the next spoon, "the finish is immaculate, as if recently buffed by a different cloth. 2 different hands worked on these spoons, one familiar with the routine, one not." He replaced the spoons and moved to the forks. "And these forks," he tapped their tines, "have remnants of gravy in their crevices, inconsistent with the last dinner service. They have been used since last evening." Sir Reginald's voice trembled. "Used? But we have had no meals here since breakfast." "Precisely, Colonel," said Poirot, "which implies the thief, or thieves, partook of a meal here in secret, using the stolen silver." He strode to the tapestry-lined wall, touching a hook from which a long cloak might have hung. "Clues such as these are small, but significant. The cutlery was washed, crudely, but serviceable, then returned. Why? To mislead investigations into internal or external laundering." He turned to Mr. Jervis. "Mr. Jervis, as an appraiser, have you ever witnessed silver used to commit subterfuge?" Mr. Jervis swallowed. I cannot say that I have. But the concept is not beyond imagination." "Imagination," repeated Poirot, arching an eyebrow. "Imagination is what brings crime to life, and also what uncovers it." He then moved to the fireplace hearth, where the note's scorched edges had been deposited. The embers still glowed slightly. With a pointed glance, he addressed Miss Marchmont. "You found this note, did you not?" She nodded. "Yes, monsieur." "And you handled it with gloves, I trust?" She glanced at her hands, encased in white kid gloves. "Naturally." "The scorch marks, however," Poirot said, holding up the envelope. bear traces of olive oil. Do you use olive oil in your hair treatment, mademoiselle? Her cheeks flushed. I do, occasionally. Poirot smiled thinly. A useful detail. The frayed edge here, he tapped the paper, suggests the writer hastily tore this from a larger sheet, possibly from Lady Blanche's personal stationery. He paused. Lady Blanche, may I request your writing materials for comparison? She hesitated, then left to retrieve her writing bureau from her chambers. While she was gone, Poirot addressed the room. We have, so far, traced the thief's path, from the ballroom to the rose garden, the attempted entrance to the conservatory, the secret dinner with stolen silver, the threatening note composed hastily on borrowed paper, and the charcoal remains in the fireplace. Each point suggests premeditation. He raised a slender finger. But premeditation, mes amis, does not necessarily reveal motive. At that moment, Miss Marchmont re-entered, carrying Lady Blanche's writing set, a copper inkwell, quill, and several sheets of monogrammed paper. Poirot took the quill, dipped it carefully in ink, and executed a looped flourish on a blank sheet. He compared it closely to the loops on the note. Observe the similarity in the downward stroke of the R and the angle of the T. Yet the pressure differs, one steady, one tremulous. The note is likely penned by someone unpracticed in refined penmanship, perhaps a lady of sudden resolve, writing under duress. He handed the set back. Thank you, Lady Blanche. The Marquess coughed lightly. Monsieur Poirot, if I may, this is all very intricate, but we still lack a central theory. Who, in your estimation, benefits most from this spectacle? Poirot turned to him with that knowing expression. The question of benefit, my lord, is indeed central. Let us list potential beneficiaries. First, someone seeking to embarrass Lady Marjorie, perhaps to force her resignation from society. Second, someone who seeks to distract us from another. Crime. Third, someone who gains emotional satisfaction from manipulating this family's anxieties. He paused, letting the possibilities linger. Sir Reginald folded his arms. May I remind everyone that my prized forks, my personal set of 3, are still missing. That suggests personal gain, does it not? Poirot nodded. Indeed, Colonel. Yet if personal gain were the sole motive, the thief would liquidate those forks swiftly. Instead, they remain in this house, perhaps hidden, awaiting another move. He tapped his temple. The mind of the thief is cunning, forever planning ahead. A soft knock sounded at the door. Miss Whittaker entered, holding a small, locked leather pouch. Monsieur Poirot, I found this in the gardener's potting shed, beneath a sack of peat. Poirot took the pouch and unfastened it. Inside lay 2 forks and a single knife, plain, utilitarian pieces lacking monograms. He examined the knife's handle under his lens. These were evidently planted to suggest an external burglar, yet the salt granules on the tines indicate they were used to eat oysters, likely last night's stolen meal. And the knife's blade bears the crest of a London club, the Athenaeum. His eyes glinted. Noble company, yes? Mr. Jervis paled. I attend the Athenaeum, but I have no connection to the silverware theft. Poirot offered a courteous nod. No doubt, monsieur. Yet you alone among us could procure such a knife, and know how to hide it here. But I shall reserve judgment until we hear your account. He placed the pieces on the table. With deliberate calm, he then addressed the entire assembly. Mes amis, the path is clear. We possess physical evidence, handwriting samples, footprints, and behavioral inconsistencies. Tomorrow, we shall interview each of you privately to compare alibis, to test contradictions and to press the psychological pressure. Only then will we see whose facade cracks. He paused, looking to me. Hastings, secure the guests' rooms and preserve all personal effects. I would examine each individual tomorrow in solitude, for it is alone, removed from the group's scrutiny, that the guilty heart trembles most. As the suspects dispersed, some with relief, others with dread, I felt the atmosphere shift. Poirot had laid out a clear investigative strategy, one that would dissect each mind in isolation. The first phase, gathering and assessing clues, was complete. The next would be the methodical questioning, where subtle lies could be exposed by his incisive intellect. Walking back to my quarters, I reflected on Poirot's assessment. Each thread of evidence now lay mapped. The mismatched polishing cloths, the private meal with stolen silver, the Athenaeum knife, the trembling handwriting, the footprints ending at the conservatory. A tapestry of intent was weaving itself, a tapestry that would, I was certain, display the culprit's face once Poirot had pulled its final knot. And in the hush of the manor's dusk, I recognized that our journey had entered its most critical phase. The mind games would now begin. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. Before dawn broke, I found Monsieur Poirot already at his desk in the library, tracing the lines of his evidence chart with a slender pencil. His waxed moustache twitched as he murmured, "Hastings, the time has come to question our suspects one by one. I shall interview them privately, for in solitude the guilty mind reveals its tremors." I nodded, feeling the familiar thrill of investigation. We agreed that Poirot would begin with Sir Reginald Blythe, whose brusque manner had concealed more than it revealed. I tapped on the Colonel's door shortly after 6 and ushered him into the small, firelit consultation room adjoining the library. Sir Reginald settled into the tall-backed chair with a military rigidity. Poirot studied him from across the low writing table. "Colonel," Poirot began gently, "yesterday you confessed to purchasing 3 forks from your own collection for personal reasons, yet those forks remain missing. Will you tell me where they were last seen?" Sir Reginald's steely gaze flicked to the table. "Monsieur Poirot, I keep them locked in my bedside cabinet. I checked it this morning. They were gone." His voice was even, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the chair's arm. Poirot inclined his head. "And your lodgings? Did anyone else have access? A valet? A maid?" "Only Cartwright brings my breakfast at 8. Before that, I am alone." The Colonel leaned forward. "Why do you press me so? I have served my country honourably." Poirot tapped the tabletop softly. "Because, Colonel, honour is a heavy burden, one that sometimes leads a man to desperate acts. Tell me, did you dine last night after midnight?" Sir Reginald's nostrils flared. I walked in the gardens, but took no refreshment." "Yet the evidence suggests someone did dine with our stolen silver." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Where were you when the silver was used and returned?" Reginald swallowed. "I slipped away to smoke a cigar. I admit it now. I met a fellow officer in the Rose Garden. We spoke of old campaigns. No more. I left by the conservatory door." I glanced at Poirot. The detective's moustache twitched in approval at the confirmation of footprints. He pressed on. "Did you see anyone else there? Perhaps cloaked?" Sir Reginald's gaze dropped. "No one." The night was silent, save for my friend's cough. We parted when I heard footsteps near the ballroom windows. Poirot nodded, rising. "Merci, Colonel. You may go." As Reginald left, Poirot whispered to me, "He stutters around his alibi. Fear, not shame. The Colonel's motive may be personal loss, but his heart is not cold enough for premeditated thievery. Our next interview was with Mr. Alfred Jervis. He awaited us in the drawing room, polishing a pair of spectacles. Poirot gestured to 2 chairs. "Monsieur, you appreciate beauty in silver, yet your suggestion to loan the Pembroke collection to a museum was rejected. Did that upset you?" Jervis smiled thinly. Not upset, but disappointed. I had hoped to share such artistry with the world. Poirot leaned forward. "And when the silver disappeared, you admired its performance, its stolen spectacle." He watched Jervis's fingers tremble on his glasses. "Tell me, had you access to the Marquis's club knife, the Athenaeum piece we found in the potting shed?" Jervis's lips parted in shock. I own such a knife, yes. I brought it here last week to compare it with the Pembroke service." His eyes darted away. "But it was kept in my room until this morning." "Then how came it to be planted beneath peat?" Poirot's tone was gentle but relentless. Mr. Jervis swallowed hard. "I cannot explain. Perhaps someone stole it from my room to frame me." Poirot's gaze did not waver. "Perhaps. But why frame you? What secret lies would that serve?" He paused. "Do you owe money, monsieur?" Jervis's face paled. He glanced at me, then back at Poirot. I have debts. My wife's illness, treatments. I have been under strain." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Strain can lead one to desperation." He stood. "Thank you, Monsieur Jervis. I shall reflect on your words." Next was Lady Blanche Ashcroft, delicate and still unwell. I escorted her to the same consultation room. She sank into the chair, her frame trembling. Poirot offered water. "Lady Blanche," he began softly, "you admitted seeking the cool air of the conservatory last night. Did you witness any intrusion?" She shook her head. "Number. But I heard whispers, low voices beneath the trees. I dared not investigate." Poirot nodded. "Voices can hint at conspiracy. Did you recognize any accents or tones?" Blanche's lips quivered. One was male, deep, unfamiliar. The other female, hushed and urgent. They spoke of silver, of sending a message. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Thank you. That confirms 2 participants. Yet our note's handwriting was feminine. Possibly the woman spoke the words, the man penned the threat." Lady Blanche covered her mouth. "Oh!" Poirot laid a calming hand on her. "Madame need worry not. Your role is witness, not culprit." He rose. "Rest now. We shall speak again if needed." The Marquis and Lady Marjorie were interviewed together. We found them in the morning room, their hands clasped. Poirot addressed the Marquis first. "My lord, you confessed your inheritance depended on preserving the silver, yet you permitted my examination of your club credentials." The Marquis straightened. "I have nothing to hide. My life's duty is this estate." "And Lady Marjorie," Poirot continued, turning to the lady of the house, "you feared humiliation. You convened us here today. Do you feel guilt in seeking to contain a potential scandal?" Lady Marjorie paused. "Only guilt that this has befallen my family." Poirot's gaze softened. Then he posed a subtle question. "Have you ever wished to punish any of your guests for their slights?" Her eyes filled. "Yes, sometimes. But I would never harm them." His moustache quivered. "Emotional punishment can take many forms." He rose. "You both may retire." Finally, Poirot invited Miss Celia Marchmont. She entered with a quiet grace. We sat in the consultation room while Poirot watched her closely. "Mademoiselle," he began, "you spoke of Parisian thefts and secret thrill. Do you find excitement in mischief?" She lowered her gaze. "I studied criminology briefly in Paris. I find human nature fascinating. Did you procure Lady Blanche's stationery? The olive oil trace suggests you handled it. Miss Marchmont's composure faltered. She bit her lip. I borrowed a sheet to write a letter of sympathy to Lady Blanche about her health. I did not think it of importance. Poirot nodded. Yet the note threatened the household. Your sympathy became a threat. She trembled. I did not mean... Poirot held up a hand. Intent matters, but outcome matters more. He rose. Thank you, mademoiselle. When she left, Poirot turned to me. Hastings, observe how the mask slips under pressure. Miss Marchmont speaks truth and omission, yet her alibi is thin. I nodded, heart pounding. Poirot catalogued each interview mentally. The Colonel's stoic courage, Jervis's financial desperation, Blanche's unwitting witness, the Marquess and Lady Marjorie's shared loyalty, and Marchmont's intellectual fascination. None confessed, yet each revealed a crack in their facade. As morning's light streamed through the library windows, Poirot clasped his hands. We have begun to unravel the inner truths of our suspects. This evening's dinner shall bring new opportunities for psychological play. For now, let us gather our notes and prepare our minds. The game advances, Hastings, and the next move must be precise. I collected the scattered notebooks, still vibrating with the energy of Poirot's mind at work. The initial interviews were complete, yet the mystery deepened. Each suspect carried motive, opportunity, and secret anxieties, and I knew that under Poirot's gentle probing, their defenses would soon crumble, revealing the hidden face of the culprit. Chapter 6. The First False Lead. That evening, the grand dining room of Styles Manor shimmered with candlelight and polished silver, yet beneath the veneer of elegance lay an undercurrent of tension. The assembled guests, Lady Marjorie Pembroke, the Marquess, Sir Reginald Blythe, Miss Blanche Ashcroft, Miss Marchmont, and Mr. Jervis, took their seats as the last of the waitstaff withdrew discreetly. Poirot sat at the head of the table, his little grey cells clearly alight with anticipation. I sat beside him, notebook in hand, ready to observe every flicker of expression. The Marquess had insisted on calling in Inspector Hamblecroft of Scotland Yard, hoping to reassure the household that justice was at hand. The inspector arrived promptly, a stout man with keen eyes and an air of officious certainty. He bowed courteously to Poirot and took his seat to the detective's right. I believe, Monsieur Poirot, he announced in clipped tones as the first course was served, that my men have apprehended the suspect responsible for last night's theft. A collective intake of breath rustled through the diners. Sir Reginald's fork paused mid-air. Miss Marchmont's crystal glass trembled ever so slightly. Poirot inclined his head politely, but offered no immediate comment. Inspector Hamblecroft continued, My officers searched the East Wing servants' quarters and discovered the missing silverware concealed beneath Miss Whittaker's mattress. Miss Whittaker had no ready explanation for its presence, and her glove, found in the conservatory, matches the size of the glove we retrieved from the fire grate. He tapped a notebook. Furthermore, Miss Whittaker's account of her rounds contained discrepancies. She claimed to have last checked the ballroom at 11 p.m., yet the silverware was removed at approximately 10:30. Miss Whittaker, seated at an inconspicuous place by the doorway, gasped and covered her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. No, Inspector, I swear I did not. I would never betray Lady Marjorie. The inspector fixed her with a stern gaze. Circumstantially, the evidence is overwhelming. I shall place you under guard. He signalled 2 constables, who moved to escort Miss Whittaker from the room. The maid's sobs echoed hauntingly off the panelled walls. Sir Reginald rose abruptly. "This is preposterous. Miss Whittaker is as loyal as the day is long." He strode toward her, but the inspector gently restrained him. "Order, please." Hamblecroft's voice rang with finality. "The case is closed." The removal of Miss Whittaker left a palpable void. Lady Marjorie rose and caught the maid's hand as she passed. "We will prove your innocence," she whispered. Miss Whittaker nodded through tears, then was led away. Poirot's eyes remained on the inspector, inscrutable. As the constables departed, he turned to Hamblecroft with a courteous smile. "Inspector, your diligence is admirable. Yet I find it difficult to accept that this gentle soul, dear to Lady Marjorie, would so brazenly betray her mistress." The inspector's lips twitched. "Monsieur Poirot, in my experience, the thief is seldom the most likely suspect." "Undoubtedly," Poirot agreed. "Nevertheless, when evidence aligns so neatly, one should examine whether it has been placed there deliberately." He allowed a moment of silence to settle. "Tell me, Inspector, did you recover any hallmarks or fingerprints on the silverware beneath Miss Whittaker's mattress?" Inspector Hamblecroft frowned. "Hallmarks, yes, the family crest unchanged. As for fingerprints, the silver had been wiped clean, but the matting underneath bore glove fibers matching Miss Whittaker's gloves." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Glove fibers are common to all household linens. But tell me, were any fibers of a different weave present?" The inspector hesitated. I do not believe my team examined that." Poirot inclined his head. "A pity, for a truly innocent person might leave no such trace, while a clever culprit could manipulate which fibers are found." He paused, turning his gaze to the Marquis. "My lord, did Miss Whittaker's gloves differ from those commonly worn by the house staff?" The Marquis furrowed his brow. "She wears fine kid gloves, yes, more delicate than the rough gloves used in the service." Poirot's thin smile returned. "Then fibers alone cannot convict her. We must ask ourselves, who would benefit most from framing the maid?" His eyes swept the table until landing on Mr. Jervis. Jervis shifted uncomfortably beneath the detective's scrutiny. Before the inspector could reply, a sudden clatter interrupted the scene. Sir Reginald's chair toppled backward, the colonel himself having swooned at the shock of his servant's arrest. The room rushed to his aid. Wine glasses rattled and silverware danced on the table. Poirot leapt to his feet, checking the colonel's pulse. He gave a curt nod. "He shall recover." Yet another dramatic twist in our curious tale. Once the colonel was supported to a side chair and offered a restorative cordial, the inspector rose, clearing his throat. "Very well, Monsieur Poirot. If you have grounds to contest this arrest, I await your findings. The Yard will hold Miss Whittaker until I receive further word." With that, he bowed stiffly and departed, leaving a tense silence in his wake. Lady Marjorie sank into her seat, wiping her eyes. "Poor dear," she murmured, glancing anxiously toward the door. "This is too much." Poirot returned to the head of the table and raised his voice gently. "Mes amis, let us not allow this distraction to thwart our investigation. The maid's arrest may be the work of a desperate mind seeking a convenient scapegoat. I cannot accept it without further inquiry." He turned to me. "Hastings, make a note to search Miss Whittaker's quarters again, this time for signs of tampering, hidden compartments, or planted items." I complied, scribbling furiously. Miss Marchmont ventured a question in a tremulous voice. "Monsieur Poirot, if Miss Whittaker is innocent, then who else could it be?" Poirot's eyes gleamed in the candlelight. "Patience, mademoiselle. A false lead serves a purpose. to draw our focus away from the true culprit. Know that the threads we have uncovered still point elsewhere. The key lies in those who wished the maid to take the blame. Sir Reginald, now recovering, managed a weak smile. You think someone set her up? Oui, Poirot said firmly. Notice how the maid's glove appeared in the conservatory, yet no one heard her there. The footprints led only to the glass house, not beyond. And the torch we found in the gardener's shed bears no traces of Miss Whittaker's mud-splattered gate. A clever thief would know how to implicate an innocent party. He stood, laying a calming hand on the tablecloth. Tonight, we dine again, quietly, without the inspector. I shall watch each of you for signs of relief, of guilt, of anticipation, for in that relief, the guilty heart may betray itself. He allowed the weight of his words to settle. As we rose to leave the table, I observed Mr. Jervis's pallor and Miss Marchmont's clenched jaw. Miss Blanche pressed a hand to her temple, still shaken by the maid's fate. Lady Marjorie's eyes brimmed with tears. Walking beside Poirot through the moonlit corridor, I ventured, "Do you truly believe Miss Whittaker is innocent?" Poirot looked skyward, as if consulting the stars. Mon ami, her distress is genuine. A real criminal does not weep so bitterly at the prospect of imprisonment. No, the true culprit orchestrated this scene to hide among the innocent. We must unmask them before they play a final, fatal card. And so the first false lead had been laid, a trap for justice, as much as for the maid. Yet Poirot's unshakable faith in the maid's innocence lit the path forward, a path that would lead us through fresh deceptions, psychological machinations, and ultimately to the heart of the enigma. Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. The next morning, the atmosphere at Styles Manor crackled with anticipation. The false arrest of Miss Whittaker had rattled everyone's nerves, and whispers of conspiracy followed each footstep. Poirot summoned the household to the conservatory just before coffee, explaining that more subtle methods would be required to flush out the true culprit. His little grey cells were sharpening a psychological web, and each suspect would soon discover how closely they were observed. As the guests assembled in the glass-walled room, tropical plants exhaled humid warmth around them. Poirot reclined on a wrought-iron settee facing the group. "Mes amis," he began, "today we embark on a different phase of our inquiry. Words spoken in confidence, glances exchanged in the shadows, these are the clues that betray the guilty heart. I shall engage each of you in small provocations to observe your reactions." He smiled gently, for even the steadiest hand trembles under the weight of guilt. He first addressed Mr. Alfred Jervis, who sat fidgeting with his pocket watch. "Monsieur Jervis, you expressed disappointment that the Pembroke silver was not loaned for exhibition. I have arranged for an exhibition catalogue to be sent here for your appraisal. Would you care to peruse it now?" He handed Jervis a slender booklet, its cover depicting gleaming silver chalices. Jervis accepted it, eyes brightening as he flipped to a page featuring monogram analysis. Poirot watched him for a long moment, then asked, "Does this satisfy your artistic sensibilities, or do you find something lacking?" Jervis's fingers stilled. He closed the catalogue with a snap. "It is fine, of course, but it lacks the character of the Pembroke patterns." He swallowed. "One misses nuance in reproduction." "Indeed," Poirot said softly. "Nuance lost, much like nuance lost when one replaces genuine pieces with imitations." His gaze sharpened. "When the silver was returned, it bore subtle imperfections. You would have noticed, non?" Jervis's lips parted and closed, his face paling. I would have noticed." He pressed the catalogue to his chest, as though to steady himself. Poirot nodded, withdrawing his attention and standing. "Thank you, monsieur. You may return to the house." Beside me, I saw Jervis's shoulders tremble. A small victory for our detective. Next, Poirot turned to Sir Reginald Blythe, who had begun to look more composed since his collapse, but still moved with tentative caution. "Colonel, last night you fainted at the sight of Miss Whittaker's removal. A most dramatic response. Might you share the cause of such distress?" Sir Reginald's jaw tightened. "I have never seen a friend treated unjustly. It reminds one of cruelty in faraway lands." Poirot's eyes softened. "Compassion, Colonel, a noble quality. Yet when one feels compassion, one sometimes acts rashly to protect the innocent." He tapped his cane. "I trust you found the maid's dismissal as offensive as I did." Sir Reginald's gaze flicked to Miss Marchmont, then away. "I have no desire to act rashly against anyone else." "Of course not." Poirot inclined his head. "Yet, consider this. You spoke of meeting an officer in the garden. He did not appear when footprints were found. Perhaps you feared he would implicate you if he spoke too freely." The Colonel's hand clenched on the cane. "My friend has no part in this matter." "Très bien," Poirot said, turning away. The Colonel exhaled, and I noted a bead of sweat glisten on his brow. Poirot then invited Lady Blanche Ashcroft to remain while the others withdrew. She sat on a wicker chaise, her pale hands clasped. Poirot offered her tea and a delicate biscuit. "Madame, you overheard voices in the garden, male and female. You preserved your discretion, for which I commend you. Yet I would ask, did you sense any familiarity in the voices?" Blanche's eyes shone with memory. "Yes." The male voice had a slight rasp, like an older man. The female voice was hushed, urgent, as if the speaker feared discovery. "An older male, you say? Someone of distinguished bearing?" Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And the woman fearful, perhaps aware of her own involvement?" Lady Blanche trembled. "Monsieur, I hope I have not caused harm." "On the contrary, you have provided clarity. Your courage in remaining quiet speaks to your character." He stood, smoothing his jacket. "Thank you, Lady Blanche. You may return to the others." When she rejoined the group at the edge of the conservatory, her delicate frame seemed steadier, as if the act of disclosure had liberated her from silent fear. Poirot then turned to Miss Celia Marchmont, who sat knitting quietly. He laid a single piece of monogrammed silver on the table before her, a dessert fork bearing the initials MP. She glanced at it, but did not pick it up. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said quietly, "this piece was among those stolen and then returned. The monogram, you will note, is reversed, a subtle slip, visible only to the practiced eye." He paused. "Who among us would dare manipulate monograms so boldly?" Miss Marchmont looked at Poirot, then at the fork. Her knitting needles clicked lightly. "Only someone intimately familiar with the family's silver." "Exactly." Poirot leaned forward. "And someone who studies patterns, such as an appraiser or scholar might." He allowed a beat. "Yet also someone who wishes to sow confusion, a scholar who knows how to mislead the mind." Her lips curved in a faint smile. "I understand your line of thought, monsieur." She resumed knitting, her expression inscrutable. Each of these exchanges served as a ploy, weaving stress into the suspect's consciousness. Poirot's method was not to accuse outright, but to apply gentle pressure, letting guilt reveal itself in furtive glances and tremulous voices. By midday, he had engaged each of the principal figures, and the conservatory had become a theatre of subtle confessions and concealed truths. After lunch, Poirot convened me in the library. He tapped his pencil against the ledger of notes. Hastings, we have observed that Jervis trembles at any mention of artistic nuance. Colonel Blythe reacts with defensive vehemence. Marchmont feigns detachment. Lady Blanche reveals gleanings of knowledge, and the Marquis and Lady Marjorie remain steadfast in solidarity. The risk now is that the true culprit grows impatient and commits another act to divert attention. I nodded. Shall we increase the pressure? Precisely. Tonight, we introduce a secondary mystery, a stolen will or an attempted poisoning, something to entangle the suspect further. Poirot's moustache quivered. By creating fear of a greater crime, we shall see who acts to conceal the original theft. That evening, the household gathered again for dinner, but the courses were served as usual, without incident. The pudding, an elaborate trifle, was placed before the Marquess, and as he raised his spoon, Poirot gave the butler a subtle nod. Moments later, the Marquess coughed sharply, eyes watering. Lady Marjorie sprang to his side. "Papa, are you ill?" The Marquess waved her away. "Just a bit of spice, my dear." Poirot rose calmly. "Mes amis, we have a secondary puzzle. The pudding appears to have been laced with cayenne pepper, far more than the recipe demands, an attempt to disgrace or harm." He turned to the assembled faces, now pallid with concern. Who would do such a thing? And, more importantly, who would wish to distract from last night's theft? A charged silence ensued. Sir Reginald's fork clattered onto his plate. Miss Marchmont's hands flew to her throat, then steadied. Mr. Jervis looked between them with haunted eyes. Lady Blanche pressed her napkin to her mouth. Lady Marjorie wept softly. The Marquess dabbed at his lips, a sheen of sweat upon his brow. Poirot let the moment linger. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Now we wait. Who among you will seize the chance to intervene, to reveal concern most genuine, or to feign ignorance most convincingly?" Eyes glared around the table, suspicion morphing into palpable fear. Each guest measured their words, each breath came weighed with intent. And in that charged company, the true culprit's mask began to fracture, for the psychologist's game was fully afoot. They would not withstand the mounting pressure. As the candle flames flickered and shadows danced on the panelled walls, I knew that tomorrow would bring fresh revelations. For tonight, the secondary mystery ensured that no heart could remain unmoved, and in their unsettled reactions lay the promise of confession. The psychological game had begun, and the guilty soul was already ensnared. Chapter 8. A Secondary Mystery. The household awoke the following morning under a pall of unease. Conversations over breakfast were stilted, the air thick with suspicion. Even the chirping of birds beyond the drawing-room windows sounded hesitant, as if nature itself hesitated to intrude upon the turmoil within. I found Poirot in the library, deep in thought, surrounded by scattered notebooks and sketches of the Silverware monograms. "Mon ami," he said, looking up with bright eyes, "last night's pudding incident has rattled our guests. Yet I suspect our culprit will soon seek a new diversion. We must anticipate their move." He tapped a pencil against his notepad. "Let us stage a secondary mystery, one that threatens to expose their deeper designs." Together, we set our plan. While the household gathered for the midday tea, Poirot would reveal that the Marquess's will had gone missing from the secure drawer where it was kept, replaced by an unmarked sheet of paper. This new crisis, he hoped, would force the guilty party to act again, or to reveal themselves in flight. At 2 o'clock, the assembled party convened in the morning room. Brown, the valet, stood behind the Marquess's chair, clipboard in hand. Lady Marjorie trembled as Poirot rose to speak. "Mes amis," he began, voice measured, "we regret to inform you that we have discovered another alarming disappearance. Last night, the Marquess's last will and testament vanished from the locked drawer in his desk. In its place lies this unmarked page. No legacy can secure one's peace. Seek the silver's shadows to find your truth." "A crude imitation," Poirot continued, holding up the paper. "The parchment differs from the original, and the handwriting is not that of the Marquess. The drawer's key was untouched in his pocket, yet someone gained access." He scanned the faces before him. "This theft may be connected to our silverware case, or may be a separate intrigue. Either way, we must consider it as deliberate misdirection." A murmur stirred the room. Sir Reginald's brow furrowed. "Who would dare steal a will and replace it so boldly?" Miss Marchmont's eyes darkened. "One who understands the value of legacy and of silver." Mr. Jervis shifted in his seat. "A will is worth far more than a mere set of forks." He swallowed. "It grants control over fate and fortune." Lady Blanche's hand flew to her throat. "But why threaten us with riddles, to force us into panic?" Poirot nodded. "Certainly. The message implies that the silver theft and the will's disappearance are linked. A challenge to our little grey cells to uncover a grand design. Yet we must not be misled." He stepped toward the Marquess. "My lord, may I ask, who else knows the contents and location of your will?" The Marquess glanced at Brown. "Only my solicitor in London and myself. No one else should have had cause or means to replace it." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And yet it has been replaced, which suggests our culprit either had access to your solicitor's duplicate or possesses intimate knowledge of your routines." He paused. "We must examine both repositories of the original and any potential duplicates." Turning to Lady Marjorie, he inquired, "Madame, during the evening's events, did you observe anyone near your husband's study?" She shook her head. "All doors were secured. Yet I heard faint scratching at the study door shortly after the pudding incident. I assumed it was the footman returning from the kitchens." Poirot's moustache twitched. "A convenient assumption. Note how the timing coincides with the pudding's dosage. Our culprit had motive to both poison and distract." He looked to me. "Hastings, please arrange for all doors and drawers to be opened in my presence. I wish to observe any signs of forced entry or tampering." As I fetched the keys, Poirot invited Miss Whittaker, recently released on bail, to join us. She entered, her steps hesitant, but her gaze steady. Poirot greeted her warmly. "Mademoiselle, your loyalty to Lady Marjorie remains unquestioned, yet your proximity to the study makes it necessary for you to assist our examination." Miss Whittaker curtsied. "Of course, monsieur." He directed her to open the desk drawer. The lock turned smoothly, revealing a bare compartment save for a smudge of brown ink near the back. "Observe," Poirot said, pointing. "A smear, perhaps from the thief's glove. Not of the soil type we found elsewhere, but residue of slimy ink." He pressed a gloved finger to the mark and lifted it away, revealing a faint fingerprint. "We shall compare this to other prints." Next, he moved to the solicitor's duplicate, which the Marquess had kept in a sealed envelope in Lady Marjorie's locked jewellery box. Lady Marjorie produced the box with quivering hands. Poirot lifted the cover and found the envelope intact. Yet the wax seal is not original. It lacks the Pembroke crest. He tapped the envelope. "A forgery." A silence fell, broken only by the distant ticking of the grandfather clock. Poirot rested his hands on the box. Hence our culprit had not only knowledge of the will's hiding place, but also sufficient time to procure forging materials. He looked at each person in turn. Now, whose hand trembles at false legacies? Whose motive grows as the silver and the will slip through their fingers? Sir Reginald cleared his throat. "I cannot imagine anyone wanting to steal a poor orphan's fate," he said, glancing at Miss Marchmont. Her gaze met his, unwavering. "An orphan, yes, but one under the Marquis's guardianship. The will may alter my future." Her voice was calm, but I noted a subtle catch. Poirot seized the moment. "Indeed, the will determines the dispersal of the estate after your lifetime, my lord. If altered, it could shift immense wealth. The silver may merely be a symbol, a proxy for the true prize." Mr. Jervis's hand twitched. "You speak of wealth. I confess, the silver's monetary worth alone could settle my debts many times over." His confession hung heavy. Poirot nodded, then addressed Lady Blanche. "Madame, you overheard the conspirators' voices. Did you hear any mention of inheritance?" She hesitated, lips parted. "No, only references to the legacy and the prize. I assumed it was a metaphor." A murmur of surprise rippled through the group. The Marquess shot a warning glance at Blanche, while Lady Marjorie clutched her hands. Poirot allowed the implication to settle. "With this secondary mystery," he concluded, "we draw a tighter circle around our suspect. They have stolen silver, attempted poisoning, and now a will, each act escalating in gravity. They believe we pursue only trifles, yet we see the pattern. Each object stolen represents power, over table manners, over life, and over fate. Tomorrow, we shall retrace suspicious movements at the hour of the will's disappearance and test each suspect's means of letter and ink. The true culprit will soon be cornered." As the party dispersed, whispers and glances abounded. Miss Whittaker lingered by the fireplace, eyes downcast but alert. Sir Reginald departed with a determined stride. Miss Marchmont vanished behind Lady Marjorie's grieving form. Mr. Jervis hovered near the door, face pale and drawn. Lady Blanche retreated to her chamber, troubled by what she had revealed. Walking beside Poirot through the hushed corridor, I ventured, "Do you believe the same person is behind all three crimes?" He pressed his lips together thoughtfully. "Undoubtedly, Hastings. The thread of symbolism, silver, spice, parchment, runs through them all. Our culprit seeks dominion by manipulating these symbols. Now, with the will's disappearance, they have shown they covet the ultimate symbol, inheritance. Their next move may be their last." In that moment I sensed that the labyrinth had grown more complex, its walls higher. Yet in Poirot's unwavering gaze, I found the promise that each twist, each diversion, would yield to the clarity of his little grey cells. And so we pressed onward, ready to confront the crescendo of deception at dawn's first light. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. By mid-morning, the manor's corridors were hushed, as if the walls themselves bore the weight of unspoken secrets. Poirot summoned the group to the morning room, where leather-bound volumes and ancestral portraits lent an air of solemnity. On a low table lay the recovered fragments of evidence, the silverware with reversed monograms, the pepper-laced pudding bowl, the forged will, and the smear of ink from the Marquess's desk. "Mes amis," Poirot began, "we now turn to the deeper fabric that binds you all. Secrets, alliances, and rivalries, these hidden connections illuminate motive more clearly than any stolen object. We shall examine your relationships to one another and to the Pembroke estate." He swept his gaze across each face in turn. He first addressed Sir Reginald Blythe. "Colonel, you served with great distinction in India. Lady Marchmont, you mentioned studying criminology in Paris. Did your paths ever cross abroad?" Miss Marchmont met his gaze without hesitation. "Indeed, Colonel Blythe was a guest at the British Club in Calcutta, and I attended a lecture there on criminological theory." She paused, knitting needles clicking. "We spoke at length about the psychology of theft." Sir Reginald coughed. "I recall advising Mademoiselle on cultural nuances, nothing more." His tone was curt, but Poirot noted the slight flush that coloured his temples. "Très bien," Poirot said, tapping his cane. "An acquaintance, then. Professional interest." He turned to Mr. Alfred Jervis. "And you, monsieur, did you happen upon this discussion?" Mr. Jervis adjusted his pince-nez. "I was not present, but I did appraise a set of silver for the same club several years later." He swallowed. "It is possible our circles overlapped." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Overlap, an important word. For where social circles intersect, opportunities arise." He turned to Lady Blanche Ashcroft. "Madame, your migraine took you to the conservatory last night. You overheard voices. Do those voices connect to any past acquaintance?" Lady Blanche hesitated, then met his eyes. "The male voice. I thought it sounded like the solicitor's assistant, Mr. Cruikshank, who visited last week regarding legal matters, but I dismissed it as my imagination." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. A solicitor's assistant? And that assistant would know of both. The silver and the will's location. Intriguing. He glanced at Lady Marjorie. Lady Marjorie's hands fluttered. "I arranged for Mr. Cruikshank to call on behalf of my husband, but he left immediately. He has no reason to act here." "Perhaps not," Poirot said gently. "Yet his knowledge remains." He then surveyed the tableau. "Now consider this. The silver expert, the criminologist, the retired colonel, the ward, the maid, the butler, all possess threads connecting them to each other and to the estate. Let us examine financial ties next." He produced a ledger listing the estate's recent expenditures, generous allowances to Miss Marchmont, payments to Mr. Jervis's appraisal firm, and significant donations to a regimental fund in Sir Reginald's name. Each entry bore a sticky note with Poirot's annotations. "Miss Marchmont," Poirot said, pointing, "you receive a sizable monthly stipend from the Marquess. That links your welfare to his favour." Miss Marchmont inclined her head. "My guardianship is stipulated in the will. I depend on that income." "Indeed," Poirot replied, "which makes the will's theft directly threaten your livelihood." Turning the page, he tapped the appraisal fee paid to Mr. Jervis. "Monsieur, your firm handled a substantial appraisal of Pembroke silver worth thousands of pounds. That fee could settle several months of your debts." Mr. Jervis's face paled. He swallowed. "Yes, but I did no more than professional service." "Professional, yes," Poirot agreed. "Yet a professional may be tempted when stakes become personal." He then pointed to a donation line. "And the regimental fund in Sir Reginald's name. Substantial contributions. You maintain strong loyalty to your regiment, but why such generosity?" Sir Reginald shifted. "I wished to support my comrades." "Admirable," Poirot said, "yet a costly generosity, one that might strain the pocket and provoke desperation." He closed the ledger and placed his gloved hand over it. "Hence, 3 suspects possess clear financial motives. Now, what of emotional ties?" He addressed Lady Blanche. "You and Lady Marjorie share a childhood friendship. Yet I noticed Blanche's gown bore a slight tear yesterday, hastily mended. Did the turmoil of last night upset you?" Lady Blanche's lips quivered. "I I was frightened. But not for myself, for her. Lady Marjorie laid a comforting hand on Blanche's arm. We have been friends since nursery school. Poirot inclined his head. Yes, and friends can carry hidden rivalries. A friend may covet another's life just as easily as protect it. Finally, he turned to Miss Whittaker and Mr. Cartwright, restored in their duties. Our loyal servants know each corridor and each secret panel. Cartwright, you manage the study keys. Miss Whittaker, you oversee the silvers polishing. Both of you possess unique opportunity. Miss Whittaker's eyes widened, while Cartwright inclined his head gravely. True, he said. We know the manner intimately. Yet loyalty, Poirot said, is a fragile thing if trust is broken. He paused, letting the weight of speculation fill the room. Mes amis, these hidden connections, financial, professional, emotional, form a web. The culprit stands at its center, manipulating each thread. Tomorrow we shall revisit these ties in greater detail, reconstructing phone calls, letters, and meetings. We shall expose which connection was exploited most cunningly. A hush followed, as the suspects digested his words. How plainly he had drawn the web that ensnared them all. Sir Reginald's jaw clenched. Miss Marchmont's knitting needles stilled. Jervis pressed his lips together. Lady Blanche's eyes shimmered, and Lady Marjorie's face betrayed both relief and dread. Walking with Poirot through the long gallery, I observed him in quiet reflection. You've laid out their motives clearly, mon ami. But do you believe the culprit will slip when we probe these connections? Poirot's moustache quivered with a smile. Hastings, the human heart cannot sustain falsehood when torn between loyalties and desires. Hidden connections are the heart's true map. Once we follow each, the path to the culprit becomes unavoidable. As we ascended the staircase, the manor seemed to pulse with anticipation. The web was fully spun. The next day's investigation would pull at its strands until the guilty soul emerged, laid bare by the clarity of Poirot's little grey cells. Chapter 10. Poirot's Secret Clue. The morning light filtered softly through the library's mullioned windows as I entered, notebook in hand, to find Monsieur Poirot seated at his writing desk. His little grey cells were deep in reflection, and upon the blotter lay the torn edges of the Marquess's will, the pepper-spattered pudding plate, and the scorched note. Yet his most prized evidence lay elsewhere, hidden from the eyes of our suspects. Hastings, Poirot said quietly without looking up, we have reached a turning point. The threads of motive and opportunity twist in many directions, but one small detail will unravel the rest. He tapped the desk's leather surface. This clue must remain our secret until the moment of revelation. He reached beneath his desk and produced a slender glass phial containing a pale, viscous liquid. Olive oil, he explained. We assumed this smear came from cosmetic oil used by the culprit to hide fingerprints, yet Madame Climene's analysis reveals it is not perfumed or refined for skin. It is a culinary first-press olive oil, unfiltered, bearing microscopic flecks of rosemary and black pepper, seasonings we have seen only in the Marquess's private pantry. I frowned. But surely more than one person uses the pantry. Poirot shook his head gently. No, Hastings. The estate's cook prepares sauces there, yet she uses standard refined oil stored in the kitchen stores. The unfiltered first-press oil is reserved for the Marquess's study dinners, small, intimate meals served to close friends, handled only by himself, Lady Marjorie, and Mr. Cartwright when he assists with late-night refreshments. He paused, ensuring I understood the gravity. Thus, the oil's provenance narrows our suspect pool to 3, and we know one of those 3 is left-handed by certain writing clues. But I keep the writing analysis for later. He placed the file back under the desk and picked up the scrawled note. Observe again the scorch patterns along the edges. The asymmetric burn marks indicate the paper was held above a flame at a precise angle, suggesting someone accustomed to handling candles in low light. But more telling is the absence of soot on the reverse side. The writer shielded the back of the page, likely by folding it or pressing it against something. The crease runs not vertically, but at an acute diagonal, just as the lapel on a woman's morning coat sits when she lights her candle. This is personal mannerism, Hastings, a signature of the culprit's habitual practice. I nodded, trying to commit every nuance to memory. So the olive oil and the burn marks both point to someone who dines privately with the Marquess, handles candles in a certain way, and uses first press oil from his study pantry. Exactly, Poirot said, his eyes alight. Now consider our 3 suspects, the Marquess himself, unlikely to forge his own will in such a crude manner. Lady Marjorie, who might feel desperation over the estate's future, and Mr. Cartwright, whose duties sometimes extend to serving the Marquess's private repasts. He paused, steepling his fingers. We must choose carefully when to reveal this clue. If we publicize it too soon, the culprit will adapt. We shall wait until they are under the greatest psychological pressure during the final gathering, before exposing how intimate our knowledge has become. At that moment, Miss Whittaker entered with a tray, her expression anxious but composed. Monsieur Poirot, the household is ready for your midday conference. She laid out tea and cookies, her gloved hands steady. Poirot nodded. Thank you, mademoiselle. Hastings and I shall join the others shortly. As she departed, he looked at me one last time. Remember, Hastings, this secret clue is the keystone of our case. Guard it as you would your own soul. Without it, we risk missing the final revelation. We rose and left the library, stepping into the marble-floored hall where the suspects were already assembled. Poirot's manner was serene, but I sensed the fierce anticipation within him. He had unmasked the critical piece of evidence, a single drop of olive oil and a telltale burn pattern that would, in time, expose the true architect of this elaborate scheme. As we took our places for the midday conference, Lady Marjorie offered Poirot a timid smile, unaware of the certainty behind his calm gaze. Sir Reginald glanced at me, suspicion still flickering in his eyes. Mr. Jervis adjusted his spectacles, lips pressed tight. Miss Marchmont knitted in silence, and Lady Blanche sat pale and watchful. Even Mr. Cartwright stood by the doorway, posture impeccable, his expression inscrutable. Poirot rose, tapping the table with his fan. Mes amis, before we proceed to examine the final motions of our inquiry, I wish to remind you that every small detail matters. The oil that smears, the paper that burns, the hand that holds the candle. Soon, these details will guide us to the heart of the matter. He allowed his words to settle like falling dust. Then, in smooth, unhurried tones, he announced the next phase of the investigation. His secret clue remained locked within his mind, to be, unleashed only when the guilty soul stood cornered, and every little grey cell had done its work. And in that tense moment, I knew the end was drawing near, and that the impeccable detective's secret would prove decisive. Chapter 11. Tensions rise. By the late afternoon, the grand drawing-room at Styles Manor felt charged with electricity. The earlier revelations, the olive oil clue, the forged will, and the spiced pudding, had unsettled each soul in turn. Poirot, seated in his habitual corner armchair, surveyed the assembled group with unblinking calm, while I observed the undercurrents of fear and suspicion that rippled through the room. Lady Marjorie sat closest to me, her lace gloves bunched in her lap. She cast anxious glances toward her husband, who leaned forward in his own chair, brows knitted in deep concern. Across from them, Sir Reginald Blythe's posture had stiffened. The Colonel's military bearing now served as armour against visible unease. Mr. Jervis hovered at the periphery, fingers drumming lightly on the arm of his seat. Miss Marchmont reclined gracefully, knitting needles forgotten in her lap as her dark eyes darted from face to face. Lady Blanche, pale but composed, pressed her lips together as though steeling herself against dread. Near the fireplace, Mr. Cartwright stood in silent watch, a sentinel of propriety. Poirot cleared his throat softly, and the room fell silent as if under a spell. "Mes amis," he began, voice gentle yet firm, "we have moved through discovery of clues, misdirection, and secret revelations. Now we enter the phase where tensions rise and alliances form or fracture. Observe one another, for in these next moments the true nature of guilt will betray itself." He rose and walked slowly to the mantelpiece, resting his hand atop an antique clock. "I propose we divide into pairs to recount our knowledge of the evening's events, and to test loyalties. Each pair shall speak in confidence for 5 minutes before rejoining the group. At the end, each pair shall report any inconsistencies or expressions of doubt." He turned to me. "Hastings, you shall mediate. Choose the pairs." I glanced around, noting the wary glances. I first paired Lady Marjorie with Miss Blanche. The two lifelong friends fell into whispered conversation on a chaise longue. Next, I paired Sir Reginald with Mr. Jervis. The retired officer and the appraiser exchanged curt nods before seating themselves at a small table. Poirot then paired Miss Marchmont with Mr. Cartwright, much to their mutual surprise, leaving the Marquess to stand and observe. As Lady Marjorie and Lady Blanche began to speak in hushed tones, I watched the ward's expression soften, drawing Lady Marjorie's burdens into a shared confidence. Yet I noted Lady Blanche's gloved hand tremble as she spoke of her migraine-induced isolation in the conservatory. Lady Marjorie placed her hand over Blanche's, offering comfort. Their whispered faces betrayed genuine concern rather than calculated performance. Sir Reginald and Mr. Jervis sat back to back on 2 chairs, facing away, as Poirot instructed. I leaned between them. "Begin," I said softly. Jervis cleared his throat, recounting the timeline of his appraisal visits and his presence at the dinner. Sir Reginald interjected precise details of his midnight stroll and collapse the previous evening. As Jervis spoke, I watched Sir Reginald's jaw clench, and I heard a faint catch in Jervis's voice as he referenced the mustard seed of debt that plagued him. The tension between them was palpable, as though each suspected the other of opportunism. Miss Marchmont and Mr. Cartwright observed each other across a small side table. Miss Marchmont spoke calmly, reminding the butler of details in the kitchen spy-hole and the secret panel behind the bookcase, knowledge she should not possess unless she had confided with Cartwright. Cartwright's measured responses betrayed a flicker of surprise at her familiarity, and I detected a subtle tightening of his lips. Their shared veil of propriety masked an uneasy alliance, or perhaps a breach of confidence. The Marquess remained standing as I called the pairs back into a circle. Poirot resumed speaking. "Now, mes amis, each pair shall report any divergence in their accounts. any sign that one has withheld truth or crafted an alibi inconsistent with another's memory. Lady Blanche spoke first. "Marjorie and I agree on everything," she said, voice soft but steady. My migraine struck at 9, and she helped me to the conservatory. We heard a disturbance at 10, nothing else. Lady Marjorie nodded. "Yes, exactly so. We corroborate one another fully." Sir Reginald cleared his throat next. "Mr. Jervis and I both agree we met only at separate times. We share no common guest." Jervis added, "Except at dinner, which we both attended. Our recollections align." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Are you certain, Colonel? Both you and Mr. Jervis recall retiring to the side lawn after dessert." Sir Reginald hesitated. "Well, I believe Mr. Jervis remained for coffee." Jervis looked startled. "Colonel, I left at 10 to retrieve something from my rooms." Reginald nodded curtly. "Yes, to your rooms." The inconsistency hung in the air, each man's timeline fractured. Miss Marchmont and Mr. Cartwright spoke next. Marchmont recounted hearing noises in the gallery late at night and assumed them to be wind against the windows. Cartwright recalled retrieving the gilt frame from the gallery for polishing. Marchmont looked surprised. "Mr. Cartwright, you never mentioned moving that frame." Cartwright's face tightened. "I did so quietly, no need to disturb anyone." Poirot leaned forward. "So one account omits the other's detail? Curious." Finally, the Marquis spoke for himself. "I had no partner in this exercise. My account remains singular, though I heard echoes of various conversations." He paused, searching their faces. "I trust these inconsistencies are not merely the failings of memory?" Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Human memory is fallible. Yet inconsistencies can arise also from intentional misdirection. The diverging accounts among those paired suggest hidden conversations, concealed actions, or deliberate omissions." A hush fell, and the tension in the room seemed to thicken. Sir Reginald's fists clenched on his knees. Mr. Jervis's lip quivered. Miss Marchmont's knitting needles clicked as though she sought ballast. Lady Blanche's eyes flickered with uncertainty. Lady Marjorie pressed her gloved hands together, and even Mr. Cartwright's posture, ordinarily unwavering, betrayed subtle strain. Poirot rose, moving gracefully to the center of the circle. "You have each now tasted the pressure of proximity and scrutiny. Notice how quickly alliances fray when shadows of doubt appear. This, the rising tension, is the perfect soil in which guilt reveals itself. Soon, the guilty party will feel compelled either to attack another's credibility or to attempt flight." He paused, letting his words settle like stones in still water. "Tonight, I shall host a quiet supper in the library, with only ourselves and the suspects present. No servants, no distractions. There I shall present the final piece of evidence and watch how each of you responds." He turned to me. "Hastings, prepare the library. We require an intimate setting wherein every expression is visible to all." As we dispersed, each suspect returning to their rooms with strained courtesy, I felt the manor's walls pulse with the hidden heartbeat of accusation. In the hush following the exercise of pairs, alliances had begun to crumble, and fear had replaced camaraderie. The first shocks of exposure had given way to the electric charge of conflict, and I knew that as the night deepened, the guilty one's mask would grow ever more fragile. Walking alongside Poirot through the oak-panelled hallway, I ventured softly, "Mon ami, do you believe these tensions will be enough to force the guilty hand?" Poirot's waxed moustache quivered in a delighted smile. It is not the force of tension alone, Hastings, but the interplay of fear and opportunity. When hope of escape fades, and the mind races for a final gambit, only one instinct remains: to be free of the trap. In that moment, the culprit will make a move, whether to accuse another or to flee. And then, mes amis, our game will reach its climax. In the shifting shadows of Styles Manor, the stage was set for the final confrontation. A confrontation fueled not by silver or ink, but by human frailty and fear, held together only by the thinnest filament of deceit. The crescendo of tension had begun, and the next act promised revelation. Chapter 12. The Confrontation. That evening, Styles Manor's library was transformed into a chamber of reckoning. The heavy drapes were drawn, lanterns set aglow upon low tables, and every servant had been dismissed. Only Poirot, Hastings, and the 6 principal suspects remained. A single mahogany table stood at the room's center, laid with crystal decanters of sherry and a plate of delicate crackers lightly brushed with pale olive oil. The faint scent of rosemary lingered in the air. Poirot stood before the table, his little grey cells alight. He addressed the group in measured tones. "Mes amis, tonight we gather not as guests but as participants in the final act of our inquiry. No servant's ear can overhear us, no footman's foot can distract us. Herein lies the true confrontation." He paused, letting his gaze roam over each face. "Who among you will falter under the weight of truth?" He poured small glasses of sherry and offered them round. "Before we proceed, a simple toast. To candour." Glasses clinked hesitantly. Poirot watched Sir Reginald raise his in steely composure. Lady Marjorie's hand trembled. Miss Blanche's eyes were wide. Miss Marchmont sipped gracefully. Mr. Jervis's hand shook. Mr. Cartwright remained impassive. Poirot beckoned Hastings to stand with him at the table's side. "Hastings, the time has come to reveal what we have so far kept hidden, the true significance of these humble crackers." He gestured to the plate. "Notice the olive oil upon them, first press, unfiltered, bearing herbs only found in the Marquis's private pantry." He turned to the group. "Only one among you partakes in those pantry dinners, the Marquis, Lady Marjorie, and one other." Lady Marjorie gasped softly. The Marquis raised an eyebrow. Mr. Cartwright bowed his head ever so slightly. Jervis's lip twitched. Poirot moved on, undeterred. "Next," he continued, "observe that these crackers bear no monograms. Unlike the silver forks, there is no mark of Pembroke upon them. Yet one of your number stained a piece of silver before returning it, using these very seasonings." He leaned forward, voice low. "You thought the smear of oil a clever misdirection, but when you cleaned the silver with a cloth, traces of rosemary clung to the handle. Tell me, monsieur," he addressed Jervis directly, "did you not once taste this oil when sampling a sauce with the Marquis?" Jervis's face blanched. His eyeglasses slipped down his nose. I do not recall." Poirot held up a single cracker, lifting it to the lantern light. "I myself partook of these at afternoon tea. The flavour was distinct, sharp, herbaceous. You, Mr. Jervis, praised it as an unusual touch in a manor kitchen, yet only those present at the Marquess's private meals would know of its use." Jervis swallowed, gulping his sherry. "I may have heard mention of it." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Heard mention or tasted? The difference matters." He stepped back, folding his hands. "But let us not dwell solely on oil. We have other proofs." He snapped his fingers, and Hastings produced the thorn-like scales of pepper from a glass vial. Poirot held them aloft. This cayenne pepper, too potent for ordinary pudding, was drawn from Lady Marchmont's personal spice collection, of which only she and her maid have keys. You asserted earlier that your maid was elsewhere, yet this spice bears your private stamp. Miss Marchmont's knitting needles fell silent. She rose, lips paling. I left the collection unlocked at breakfast. Anyone could have taken it. Poirot studied her coolly. An unfortunate oversight, yet anyone could have locked it again, save one with ready access. He swiveled to Sir Reginald. Colonel, you wandered the halls at midnight. Would you have dared enter a ward's private room in the dark? Sir Reginald bristled. I would not violate propriety so. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet you admit meeting an officer in the rose garden at that hour. Your bravado in public conceals risk in private. He turned finally to Cartwright. But you, Mr. Cartwright, know every nook and key of this house. You delivered late-night refreshments, handled candles, and you alone could move the silverware unseen. Cartwright's posture stiffened, but his expression remained unreadable. Poirot swept his gaze over each suspect in turn. The oil, the pepper, the forged will, the spiced pudding, all threads of a single tapestry. The tapestry's design points to a single hand. He allowed a pregnant pause. Yet I wish to hear from each of you in turn how you account for these details, before I name the architect of this design. He pointed to Mr. Jervis. Monsieur Jervis, your appreciation for culinary nuance was well known. You have spoken of sauces and seasonings in private. Explain the oil. Jervis's shoulders slumped. He set his glass on the table. Monsieur Poirot, I admired the quality of the oil when sampling a sauce in the study. I asked the cook where it came from. I tasted it. He swallowed. But I did not steal the silver. I did not replace the will. I did not lace the pudding. His voice cracked. Poirot inclined his head. Very well. And you, Miss Marchmont, how do you explain the pepper's provenance? Miss Marchmont's eyes darted to Cartwright, then back. I grant that I know the spice cabinet well. I used it for my own teas, but last night I locked it after use. She placed a shaky hand on the table. I did not break the lock. Sir Reginald stood abruptly. Enough of this. I have heard false accusations enough. He strode forward, but Poirot raised a gloved hand. Colonel, please remain seated. His tone was firm. What say you of the pepper? Sir Reginald's throat worked. I saw something in the gallery. Mr. Cartwright carrying a sack. He pointed at Cartwright. I demanded to know what it was, and he fled. Cartwright's composure fractured for an instant. His normally steady gaze flickered. He inhaled. Colonel, I retrieved a loose panel for polishing, nothing more. Poirot nodded, and yet the sack held the missing silver, hidden until I retrieved it beneath the peat. You did not mention it until you were pressed. Cartwright's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Poirot pressed on. Lady Blanche, you witnessed voices in the conservatory. Name the speaker. Lady Blanche hesitated, then whispered, It was Miss Whittaker's voice, but Poirot's eyes narrowed. Miss Whittaker, who is innocent, so the voice was mimicked. The room gasped. Miss Whittaker stood at the back, pale but resolute. Poirot stepped to her side. Mademoiselle, you did not conspire, but someone imitated your voice to frame you. He turned back. Now, Lady Marjorie, you have heard the details. How do you reconcile your love for this household with all these betrayals? Tears brimmed in her eyes. I cannot. She sank into a chair. Poirot's voice softened. One more admission, my lady, the will's parchment. You claim to know nothing of its location. Yet you alone hold the solicitor's duplicate in your jewellery box." She shuddered. My husband insisted I keep it there." He raised a finger. "And you, fearing loss of the estate, arranged its theft, and then the silver, to scare him. All this, to force him to rewrite his will in favour of your own daughter from a previous marriage." A stunned silence followed. Lady Marjorie's composure shattered. She covered her face with trembling hands. "I know." Poirot turned to the others. "The truth lies bare. The drama, the diversions, the false leads, all to mask one truth, that Lady Marjorie feared losing her child's future. In desperation she orchestrated these acts." He paused. Yet she could not bear to carry out a true poisoning. The pudding was meant only to alarm. Lady Marjorie sank, sobbing. The assembled suspects stared, relief, shock, pity mingling on their faces. Mr. Jervis exhaled, collapsing into a chair. Sir Reginald bowed his head. Miss Marchmont closed her knitting bag. Lady Blanche rushed to cradle Lady Marjorie's shoulders. Cartwright moved forward to offer a supportive hand. Poirot addressed me softly. "Hastings, call the authorities. Our game is complete." He turned to the weeping lady of the house. "Madame, the law must take its course, but your motives, though flawed, arose from love." He placed a kindly hand on her shoulder. "May your little grey cells guide you to redemption." And so, amid broken wills and shattered trust, the grand confrontation revealed the heart of deceit and the strength of compassion, even in the darkest of designs. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. The hush that fell over Styles Manor after Lady Marjorie's tearful confession was so complete that even the crackle of the fireplace seemed conspicuously loud. Poirot stood by her side, his demeanour softer than ever, as Hastings quietly summoned the local constable. The other guests clustered in awkward relief and pity, their eyes fixed upon the fallen lady of the house. Yet as the constable approached to place Lady Marjorie formally under arrest, a sudden commotion erupted at the far end of the library. The heavy portrait of Lord Pembroke, Lady Marjorie's late uncle, shuddered upon its hinges and swung slowly outward, revealing a narrow, dimly lit passageway. Before anyone could cry out, Lady Marjorie, her skirts gathered in one hand and her face streaked with tears, darted through the opening. "Mon Dieu!" cried Poirot, seizing Hastings's arm. "She makes her move!" With surprising agility, Lady Marjorie glided down the secret corridor, her polished boots muffled by the thick carpet runner. The others sprang into action. Sir Reginald vaulted over a chair, Miss Marchmont shrieked and clutched her shawl, and Mr. Jervis knocked over a side table in his haste to pursue. But Poirot raised a gloved hand. "Patience, mes amis," he called. "Allow me." I anticipated a flight attempt. "Hastings, with me." Hastings followed Poirot's long strides, while the constable and Sir Reginald fanned out behind. The passage was narrow, lined with old maps and bronze sconces, and the only light came from flickering candles affixed at intervals. At its end stood a timber door, fastened by a simple latch. Poirot paused, took out a slender key from his coat pocket, one he had discreetly drawn from Lady Marjorie's own keyring during the confrontation, and unlocked it. The door swung open onto a small courtyard enclosed by high stone walls, vines trailing. Overhead, moonlight glinted on damp cobblestones. For a moment, Lady Marjorie stood at the threshold, breathless and pale, catching her bearings. Hastings saw the glint of desperation in her eyes. "Madame," Hastings called softly, "this need not end in harm." She glanced back, uncertainty warring with resolve. Then, hearing the voices behind her, she bolted toward the wrought-iron gate at the courtyard's far end. Hastings hesitated, allowing Poirot, already halfway across the courtyard, to intercept her path. Poirot advanced with gentle authority. "Madame, you cannot elude justice." Lady Marjorie skidded to a halt before the gate. "Please," she whispered, voice trembling, "they will take everything, my home, my daughter's future." Poirot's eyes betrayed compassion. "Your attempt to secure your daughter's future led you astray, but the laws must be served. I pledge they will show mercy given your motives." She wavered, hand on the gate's latch. The constable's footsteps echoed along the corridor. Sir Reginald and Hastings closed in. Miss Marchmont appeared at the gate's arch, her face awash with conflicted sorrow. Lady Blanche's trembling silhouette stood in the doorway behind them, witnessing the scene. For one breathless instant, Lady Marjorie's desperate gaze flickered from Poirot to her friends. Then, as if summoned by conscience, she released the latch and turned back. I yield," she sobbed. Poirot stepped forward and closed the distance, his hand clasping hers. "Very good, madame. You have done well." He guided her gently back through the courtyard. Hastings secured the gate, while the constable, arriving breathless, took Lady Marjorie into custody with respectful firmness. Inside the library, the guests gathered once more, subdued by the night's drama. Poirot rejoined them, dusting imaginary specks from his coat. Lady Blanche hurried to Lady Marjorie's side as Mrs. Whittaker, recently cleared of suspicion, brought water in a crystal glass. Poirot turned to the assembled party. "Mes amis," he said quietly. The desperate attempt to escape was the final reveal of Madame's burden. Under pressure, she fled by means only she, and those loyal to her, knew. Now all is concluded. Let us show compassion in her hour of need. Sir Reginald bowed his head. A sad end to a tragic course. Miss Marchmont laid a comforting hand on Lady Blanche's arm. "We will see that Carlotta, Madame's daughter, remains unharmed." Mr. Jervis cleared his throat. I shall do whatever I can to soften the blow." Poirot surveyed them, his little grey cells already stretching forward to the final gathering and the dispensation of justice. "Tomorrow, we shall present our full conclusions to the authorities," he announced. "For now, let us ensure that no further harm befalls anyone in this household." As the group dispersed, Hastings lingered by Poirot's side. "You handled that perfectly, mon ami." Poirot's eyes reflected both relief and sadness. "Yes, Hastings. Desperation can lead even the most devoted to reckless acts. Yet her attempt to escape confirmed what we already knew, that love, when twisted by fear, can obscure reason." He glanced toward the closed portrait that concealed the corridor. "Now, the path of deception lies fully exposed. Tomorrow, we shall walk it together to render justice and mercy in equal measure." The night's final act had ended not in tragedy, but in resolution, thwarted flight transforming fear into surrender and sealing the culmination of Poirot's deft orchestration. In the hush that followed, I felt the manor exhale, as if relieved to lay down its secrets at last. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The dawn after Lady Marjorie's thwarted flight found Styles Manor enveloped in a hushed reverence. The household whispered among itself as servants moved with furtive glances, and the grand portraits in the gallery seemed to watch the unfolding denouement. Poirot summoned us once more to the drawing-room for what he termed the final piece of evidence. Even the normally unflappable Mr. Cartwright appeared tense, his posture betraying the weight of what was to come. We assembled in a circle around Poirot, who stood by the ornate fireplace. Upon the mantel rested a small array of items: the olive oil file, the scrap of scorched note, 2 pepper scales, and a single, unassuming glove, white kid, with a woman's slender fingers. Beside them lay a leather-bound journal, its edges worn, and a silver monogrammed cup bearing a tiny, nearly invisible chip at its rim. "Mes amis," Poirot began, hands clasped behind his back, "we have seen how each clue, oil, note, pepper, forged parchment, wove a tapestry of misdirection. Yet one element remained hidden, concealed in plain sight until now." He motioned to the journal. This diary was found tucked into the Marquis's secret drawer, previously unnoticed among legal papers. Its owner's name is not inscribed, but its entries are unmistakably written in a left-handed script, similar to the tremulous handwriting on our threatening note. He opened the journal to an entry dated 3 nights ago, just before the silverware vanished. "My heart pounds like a drum in the night. The silver must disappear before he alters his will further. I cannot bear the thought of her unprotected. Tonight I steal both silver and heart, leaving no trace but a message of warning. May these simple pieces secure my child's future." Poirot traced his finger along the sentence. "Note the repetition of simple pieces, a reference to common silverware. The writer's own words confess the act, but note also the phrase steal both silver and heart. The silver was stolen first. The heart, the will, followed. This sequence underscores premeditation." He closed the book gently. Yet who penned these lines? He held up the lone glove. One white glove, found in the conservatory by Miss Marchmont's embroidery stool. Fingerprints lifted from the Marquess's desk revealed a partial print matching this glove's interior seam, not the maid's coarser gloves, but a woman's fine kid glove. Only one woman in this estate regularly wears such gloves, Lady Marjorie. A murmur swept through the room. Lady Marjorie, seated on a settee opposite Poirot, drew a quivering breath, but said nothing. Poirot turned to the scorched note. "This note was torn from Lady Blanche's stationery, yes, but notice the diagonal fold, indicating the writer pressed it against her lapel as she wrote by candlelight. Lady Blanche possesses a mourning coat with pointed lapels, but she never lights candles at her desk. Lady Marjorie, on the other hand, has been accustomed to late-night meetings in the study." He produced the olive oil phial. "We traced this oil to the Marquis's pantry, used in secret dinners. Lady Marjorie confessed to hosting such dinners for confidants, yet she claimed she dined only once privately, with no need for seasoning. The presence of first-press oil on the silverware and on these crackers confirms the same hand that prepared the private dinners prepared the illusion of a hidden banquet using stolen silver." Poirot paused, letting each fact settle. "Now the pepper scales." He tapped them. These were drawn from Miss Marchmont's cabinet, but only one person had both access and motive to hide them, the lady of the house. Lady Marjorie arranged for Miss Marchmont's maid to retrieve linens at night, clearing the way to the cabinet undetected, and then returning the pepper to its shelf so that suspicion would fall elsewhere. He stepped back and surveyed the assembly. Every clue aligns, mes amis. The olive oil, the burn patterns, the pepper, the glove, the journal. But we must also consider psychological evidence. The timing. Lady Marjorie's desperation peaked when she believed the Marquis would rewrite his will to favour charitable causes. Her own child's security depended upon it. Her love, twisted by fear, drove her to orchestrate these diversions, each act a rehearsal for the final act of coercion. He turned his gaze to Lady Marjorie, whose eyes brimmed with tears. "Madam, Your confession to Hastings revealed the depth of your anguish, yet no one suspected that beneath the tears lay the calculated mind that arranged every detail. Your attempt to escape was an instinctive flight from the consequences of your actions. Lady Marjorie rose, voice wavering. I admit it all. I staged the theft of silver to frighten him, the spicing of the pudding to dissuade him from rewriting the will, the disappearance of the actual will to force his hand. My child's future was everything to me. Poirot inclined his head gently. Your motive, though understandable in a maternal heart, led you into a labyrinth of deceit. It is fortunate no one was physically harmed. Now, justice must be served. He addressed the group once more. Mes amis, we have reached the end of this intricate dance of shadows. At noon today, I shall accompany the Marquis and the Constable to the solicitor's office, where the true will may be restored, or rewritten with proper authority. Lady Marjorie, you will face the consequences, yet I trust that mercy will find its place alongside justice. Sir Reginald stepped forward and offered his hand to Lady Marjorie. Even in sorrow, the bonds of family endure, he said softly. Miss Marchmont laid a shawl about her shoulders. Lady Blanche pressed water to her lips. Mr. Jervis bowed respectfully. Even Mr. Cartwright, his duty regained, gave a small sympathetic nod. Poirot watched these gestures of compassion. Compassion, he said quietly, is the greatest antidote to the poisons of fear. Though this crime was conceived in love, its remedy shall be found in forgiveness tempered by justice. As the gathering disbanded, I caught Poirot's eye. In his look, I recognized both triumph and sorrow. Triumph at the final piece falling into place, sorrow at the lengths to which love could lead. The manner exhaled as if relieved, and I knew the final act, the grand reveal, awaited us at noon, when every little grey cell of justice would find its rest. Chapter 15. The Final Gathering. At precisely 11 o'clock, the drawing-room of Styles Manor stood ready for the culmination of our inquiry. The window drapes were drawn to soften the morning light, amber lanterns glowed upon side tables, and the great mahogany table, once the scene of stolen silver, now bore only fresh tea and biscuits. No distractions remained. The servants were paused in the hall, awaiting instructions, and the 6 principal figures entered one by one, drawn silently by the weight of what must come. Poirot stood at the head of the table, his posture erect, moustache immaculately waxed. Hastings took his place to the detective's right. Opposite them, the Marquis of Pembroke sat with a severity tempered by sorrow. Beside him, Sir Reginald Blythe's military composure wavered. Lady Blanche Ashcroft's delicate features betrayed empathy for her friend. Miss Marchmont remained poised, though her dark eyes brimmed with curiosity. Mr. Jervis, pale but resolute, settled into his chair. Across from them, on a low settee, Lady Marjorie sat quietly, hands clasped, ready to face the consequences of her actions. Mr. Cartwright and Miss Whittaker, restored to their innocent roles, stood respectfully behind her, embodying the household's shaken but unwavering loyalty. Poirot cleared his throat softly. The hush that followed held a solemn gravity. Mes amis, he began, we meet at the juncture of truth and mercy. You have heard the evidence, observed the flight and confession of Lady Marjorie, and witnessed our final clues. Now let us reconstruct the events, step by step, so that nothing remains hidden, and every heart may find relief in clarity. He lifted a silver tray bearing a single monogrammed spoon and placed it at the table's centre. First, the disappearance of the silverware, he said. Lady Marjorie, you may recapitulate your actions. She rose, voice trembling but firm. In the study, I took the central service pieces under cover of night, Lady Marjorie began. I polished them with the first press oil I had previously used only for our private meals, then hid them beneath the peat in the gardener's shed. I placed the reversed monogram pieces on the breakfast sideboard to suggest an outside intruder. She paused, glancing at the monogrammed spoon. I meant only to alarm my husband, to frighten him into rewriting his will in favor of our daughter, Carlotta. Poirot nodded, steepling his fingers. And the note? I borrowed Lady Blanche's stationery, Lady Marjorie continued, voice quavering, and wrote the threat by candlelight, pressing the paper against my lapel. The burn marks were meant to imitate a furtive hand, not to harm. Poirot replaced the spoon and moved to the next exhibit, a fragment of the pudding bowl. The spiced pudding, he said, displaying a shard glazed with lingering cayenne. You added the pepper from Miss Marchmont's cabinet to dissuade the Marquis from dinner. Lady Marchmont's gaze met hers. I left the cabinet unlocked at breakfast, and she seized the opportunity. Lady Marjorie nodded in confirmation. Poirot laid the shard aside and lifted the forged will's parchment. You then stole the original will, replacing it with a crude forgery to force the issue. Lady Marjorie's eyes filled. I had studied the solicitor's duplicate, memorized its location, and then hid the original in the gallery's secret panel. I never intended to forge a new final testament, only to bring him to the table. Poirot set the parchment down. Lastly, your flight through the portrait passage. Your fear of disgrace overrode your reason. She bowed her head. Yes. Poirot turned to the Marquis. And you, my lord, upon discovering the theft, acted with both shock and restraint. You sought the law, yet allowed us this inquiry. The Marquis inclined his head, voice grave. I wished for truth before judgment. Poirot then invited Sir Reginald to speak of his role. The Colonel rose with constraint. I confronted Mr. Cartwright in the gallery, mistaking his task for further deceit. I apologized once I learned the true nature of his errand. Cartwright stepped forward to nod. I was retrieving the silver from hiding, at Poirot's instruction. I meant, only to conceal it until the truth emerged. Poirot acknowledged their contributions. Next, Miss Marchmont and Miss Blanche, whose testimonies guided our threading of voices and written signals. Lady Blanche spoke softly. I overheard conspiratorial whispers and the trembling hand writing the note. My heart sought only to protect my friend. True innocence rescued from shadows. Miss Marchmont added, I observed movement at locks and cabinets, piecing together the sequence. Though I played no part, my knowledge aided the detective. Poirot allowed a brief silence, and Mr. Jervis, who discovered the quality of the oil and may have tasted similar blends in the study. Jervis swallowed. I admired the flavor, but never suspected the depth of its use in this scheme. My debts weighed heavily upon me, but I remained honest. Poirot's smile was gentle. Your candor honors you. Now, mes amis, we have heard each perspective. Let this gathering restore harmony. He paused, then raised his voice. Lady Marjorie will face the authorities, yet Carlotta's future shall be safeguarded through the Marquis's reaffirmed will. The silver service shall be returned to its rightful place in the display cabinet, unblemished by deception. The kitchen staff will recreate the special oil blend only for approved dinners. And each of you, by your compassion and cooperation, has proven that even amid betrayal, loyalty can endure. A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Sir Reginald bowed to the Marquess, Lady Blanche embraced Miss Marchmont. Jervis offered a respectful nod. Cartwright and Miss Whittaker exchanged relieved glances. At the centre, Lady Marjorie rose, brushing away tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for understanding." Poirot extended his hand to her. "Compassion is the great balance to justice. May your future be brighter for what we have learned." As the final gathering disbanded, Hastings fell into step beside Poirot in the corridor. "You orchestrated it beautifully," I said. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The gathering was a mirror, Hastings, reflecting each heart's truth. And in that reflection, justice found its clarity." He paused at the great front door, gazing back at the silent manor. "Now, let us ensure that the lessons of fear and love guide this household to peace once more." With that, we departed for the solicitors, leaving Styles Manor to inhale the calm promise of resolution. Chapter 16. The Reveal. Late that same morning, we made our way to the solicitors' offices in the nearby market town, a dignified Georgian building whose polished mahogany doors bore the sign of Rutledge and Company. The Marquess led, flanked by Poirot and Hastings, with Lady Blanche and Sir Reginald close behind. Miss Marchmont and Mr. Jervis followed, and even Mr. Cartwright and Miss Whittaker, reinstated in their roles, accompanied us, silent witnesses to the climax of our inquiry. Inside the panelled waiting room, Miss Rutledge, the solicitor's senior partner, received us with grave courtesy. At her nod, we passed through into her private study, where the solicitor's desk stood beneath a brass banker's lamp. Mounted shelves held volumes of law reports, and upon the desk lay two thick ledgers, one containing the original will, the other its more rigidly worded duplicate. Miss Rutledge rose and swept a courteous glance over our party. "My lord, I trust you have recovered the original will." The Marquess inclined his head slightly toward Poirot. "Yes, thanks to Monsieur Poirot's extraordinary efforts." Poirot stepped forward, placing his slight form between Lady Marjorie, escorted by Miss Whittaker, and the desk. He addressed Miss Rutledge and Inspector Havisham, who had accompanied us from the constabulary. "Madame, we are here to restore legal order, but first, allow me to present the evidence that led us to the truth." He laid out the silver monogrammed spoon, the forged parchment, the olive oil phial, the pepper scales, and the single white kid glove on the solicitor's blotter. Inspector Havisham leaned forward, examining each exhibit as Poirot spoke in crisp, measured tones. "First," Poirot began, "the disappearance of the silver service was intended not for profit, but as a means to alarm the Marquess. The spoons and forks were concealed beneath the peat, then returned with reversed monograms to imply an external thief." He indicated the spoon. "This spoon bears fine traces of rosemary-infused olive oil drawn from the private pantry, oil accessible only to the Marquess, Lady Marjorie, and her faithful butler, Mr. Cartwright." He laid a shard of the pudding bowl beside it. "Next, the pudding was laced with an excess of cayenne pepper, drawn from Miss Marchmont's spice cabinet. That act, designed to alarm rather than harm, used a spice stamped with her personal crest, a diversion aimed at incriminating others." Poirot lifted the scrap of forged parchment. Then the Marquess's will was replaced with a crude forgery, composed on Lady Blanche's monogrammed stationery by candlelight, burn patterns indicating the writer's habitual handling of lapel-mounted candles. The original will was hidden in the gallery's secret panel. He produced the glove and journal. Finally, this white kid glove, bearing a fingerprint matching the desk's ink residue, and this diary entry, penned in left-handed script, confessed to the thefts and their motive, securing Lady Marjorie's daughter's inheritance. Inspector Havisham straightened, nodding slowly. "I see. So Lady Marjorie devised the entire scheme, using each clue as a stepping stone in her plan?" Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, monsieur. Her maternal devotion, twisted by fear of her child's future, drove her to co-opt household secrets, pantry oils, spice collections, private stationery, to force her husband's hand." Miss Rutledge exchanged a glance with Havisham, then turned to the Marquess. "My lord, with the original will recovered, you may validate your intended dispositions. May I suggest we execute a new codicil to clarify that Lady Marjorie remains the guardian of Master Carlotta, despite her legal entanglements?" The Marquess bowed. "Yes, that is my wish." He settled into the solicitor's chair as Miss Rutledge produced pen and ink. Hastings stepped forward to bear witness. While the solicitor prepared the codicil, Poirot quietly addressed Lady Marjorie. "Madame, your remorse is evident. The law will take its course, but I trust the court will temper justice with compassion, given your motive." Lady Marjorie's eyes brimmed with tears. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for seeing my intent, not only my crime." Poirot's moustache quivered in a gentle smile. "Intent humanizes the accused, but it does not absolve the act. Yet, I have faith that mercy will be granted." Minutes later, the new codicil was signed and witnessed. The solicitor laid out both wills side by side, explaining the legal terminology to the Marquess, whose features softened as he realized his daughter's future was secure once more. Outside the office, the afternoon sun warmed the stone facade as we prepared to leave. Inspector Havisham approached Poirot, offering his hand. "Monsieur Poirot, your deductions were impeccable. I have much to learn from your methods." Poirot shook his hand lightly. "Merci, monsieur. In mysteries of the heart and mind, the smallest clue can reveal the grandest design." Miss Marchmont and Lady Blanche exchanged relieved smiles. Even Sir Reginald clapped Poirot on the shoulder in admiration. Mr. Jervis and Mr. Cartwright offered respectful nods. Miss Whittaker approached, curtsying. "I remain ever in your debt, Monsieur Poirot, for restoring my good name." Poirot inclined his head. "And so your loyalty has been rewarded and proven true." At the foot of the steps, the Marquess paused. "Monsieur Poirot, will you accompany us back to Styles Manor? Our household must be restored to order, and your guidance would be invaluable." Poirot looked skyward, then smiled at Hastings. "Mon ami, shall we return to Styles? I believe our work there is complete, and that peace may at last take hold." As we climbed into the waiting carriage, Hastings settled beside Poirot. I glanced back at the Georgian facade one last time, feeling the weight of tension lift from my shoulders. Inside the carriage, Poirot pressed a single gloved fingertip to his temple. "The reveal is not merely the naming of the culprit, Hastings," he mused, "but the restoration of balance. Justice must be served, but compassion tempers the law. And so, the case of the disappearing silverware, the spiced pudding, and the vanished will find its end, not in tragedy, but in a renewed hope for all involved." The carriage wheels turned, carrying us back toward Styles Manor, and toward the quiet promise of resolution that awaited us there. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice. The carriage's wheels hummed softly along the country lane as we approached Styles Manor once more. Dawn's light had softened into a gentle morning glow, and the gardens beside the drive seemed to exhale in relief, petals lifting in the breeze. Inside the carriage, a quiet settled among our party, each reflecting on the events of the past 24 hours. Poirot sat with impeccable posture, his gaze serene. Beside him, Hastings closed his notebook, careful not to disturb the detective's contemplative mood. Lady Blanche sat opposite, leaning toward Miss Marchmont in whispered conversation, their earlier fears already shifting toward compassion and care. Sir Reginald and Mr. Jervis exchanged warm nods, distance having given way to solidarity. Mr. Cartwright and Miss Whittaker sat near the door, their shoulders straight, their loyalty once more honoured. At the manor gates, the butler, now restored to his position of trust, bowed deeply as the carriage drew up. The driver set down the steps, and we stepped out into the dew-kissed drive. The butler assisted Lady Blanche and Miss Marchmont inside, while Hastings helped Lady Marjorie, flanked by Miss Whittaker for support, and the Marquis followed, offering his arm in gentle reassurance. Inside the hall, the household staff, maids, valets, and gardeners, gathered at respectful distance, their eyes bright with anticipation and relief. As we passed, a murmur of gratitude rippled through the group. Even the portrait of Lord Pembroke seemed to smile upon our return. Poirot paused at the foot of the grand staircase and raised his hands for silence. Every face in the hall turned toward him. "Mes amis," he began, "we have witnessed yesterday's confusion and today's clarity. Lady Marjorie has confessed and faced the law with dignity. Yet justice is not served by punishment alone, but by the restoration of balance and the preservation of compassion." He motioned toward Lady Marjorie, standing poised between the Marquis and Hastings. The hush deepened. "My lady, the law will take its course under Inspector Havisham's guidance. However," Poirot's voice softened, "I have spoken with the local magistrate, who, in view of your motives and immediate confession, will recommend leniency. Your sentence may be limited to a fine and community service rather than imprisonment." A collective sigh of relief swept through the staff. Lady Marjorie's eyes filled with tears, not of fear, but of gratitude. She curtsied deeply. "Merci, Monsieur Poirot. Your advocacy honours me beyond words." The Marquis stepped forward and placed a protective hand on his wife's shoulder. "My dear, we shall face this together. Carlotta's future will not be compromised." His voice, firm yet gentle, carried reassurance. Poirot turned next to Sir Reginald and Mr. Jervis. "Inspector Havisham has confirmed that no charges will be brought against either of you. Your integrity aided justice." Sir Reginald inclined his head, and Jervis offered a grateful nod. "To you," Poirot continued, addressing Miss Marchmont and Lady Blanche, "your courageous testimonies and unwavering support were essential. Your facts guided our deductions." They exchanged modest smiles. He then addressed Mr. Cartwright and Miss Whittaker. "And to you, faithful servants, whose innocence was threatened and proved, justice has been restored. I trust your duties here shall continue with renewed honour." Cartwright and Whittaker both bowed their heads respectfully. At this, the staff quietly rustled behind them, a chorus of relief and affirmation. Brown, the valet, stepped forward with a genteel flourish. "Monsieur Poirot, if you would honour us by staying for luncheon, we wish to express our thanks in kind." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "A most agreeable proposal, but first, allow me to complete my duties." He turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, shall we?" Hastings nodded. Together, they escorted Lady Marjorie and the Marquis to the drawing room for a final consultation with Inspector Havisham, ensuring the official paperwork was in order. Meanwhile, the remaining guests and staff prepared for the luncheon, arranging tables in the sunlit conservatory, where roses bloomed with renewed vigour. In the drawing-room, Poirot reviewed the magistrate's recommendations. The inspector inscribed them upon official forms, signing each with solemnity. Lady Marjorie watched, her composure steady, though her shoulders trembled with relief. Poirot placed a comforting hand upon her arm. "With your cooperation, madame, you shall avoid the harsher penalties of the law. I believe this outcome honors both justice and compassion." Lady Marjorie's lips quivered in a grateful smile. "Merci, Monsieur Poirot, for guiding us through darkness." He inclined his head. "The greatest satisfaction lies in illuminating truth and preserving humanity." At that moment, the distant chime of a distant clock summoned us to luncheon. We filed into the conservatory, where white-clothed tables shimmered beneath the glass roof. The petals of the roses seemed to nod in welcome. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blossoms and freshly baked bread. The luncheon was quietly celebratory. Toasts were raised to the Marquess's health, to Lady Marjorie's restored dignity, to the household's renewed harmony. Even Sir Reginald, who seldom raised his glass outside formal occasions, offered a hearty "to justice served." Mr. Jervis, his debts now less burdensome, smiled and added, "To mercy well placed." Miss Marchmont and Lady Blanche exchanged cheerful conversation, their laughter light and warm. Mr. Cartwright and Miss Whittaker, seated side by side, shared quiet smiles, their bond strengthened by adversity. Brown circulated among us, ensuring each place setting included the monogrammed silver, now gleaming with authenticity. Poirot sat at the head of the longest table, a figure of serene fulfillment. Hastings settled beside him, raising his glass. "To the little grey cells," he toasted quietly. Poirot tapped his glass gently. "And to earnest hearts," he replied, voice warm. Throughout the meal, guests remarked upon the simple joy of shared company, untainted by secrets or fear. The silverware glinted under the sunlight, a symbol no longer of theft, but of restored order. The olive oil, once used to mislead, now glistened upon fresh greens in a salad, its flavour a reminder of both temptation and taste. As the luncheon waned, the Marquess rose, summoning attention. "Before we part, let me express my deepest gratitude to Monsieur Poirot and Mr. Hastings. You have preserved not only our estate but our honour and our faith in one another." He paused, emotion softening his stern features. "I extend this invitation to you both, to remain as our guests at Styles Manor as long as you wish." Poirot inclined his head with courtly grace. "Your hospitality continues to honour us, my lord." Hastings bowed. "It would be our pleasure to stay." And so, amid laughter renewed and the soft glow of afternoon, justice found its balance in mercy, and the household of Styles Manor breathed freely once more. The bond of community, tested by deceit and fear, emerged stronger, proof that even the darkest schemes can be undone by truth, compassion, and the steady light of reason. Chapter 18. The Closing Remark. As the last guests drifted from the conservatory into the sunlit gardens, where the roses, now fully in bloom, nodded their petals in gentle approval, Monsieur Hercule Poirot and I took our leave of Styles Manor. The carriage awaited us, yet neither of us was in haste to depart. The warmth of resolution still lingered in the air, and the manor itself seemed to exhale relief. Once settled inside, Poirot closed his eyes briefly, as though savouring the silence. At length he opened them and turned to me with a faint smile. "Mon ami," he said softly, "every mystery must end, just as every illness must meet its cure. Here, justice and compassion have walked hand in hand, and the equilibrium is restored." I nodded, thinking of the household's transformation from suspicion and fear to trust and solidarity. Lady Marjorie's confession, born of maternal desperation, had led to an extraordinary exercise in psychological dexterity. Each suspect had been tested, each thread of evidence meticulously woven, and at the end, even the deepest wounds found a measure of healing. "Truly, Poirot," I replied, "it was your little grey cells that guided us, yet your compassion that tempered the verdict." He inclined his head. "Without compassion, dear Hastings, justice becomes a mere system of punishment. But when mercy informs justice, the human heart is uplifted." Outside, the carriage wheels clattered over the manor's gravel drive. Through the window, I saw Carlotta, the Marquis and Lady Marjorie's young daughter, standing on the terrace steps, her ribboned hair glinting in the afternoon sun. She waved, her small hand raised in a joyful salute. Lady Marjorie, released from her burden, bent to embrace her child, whispering words I could not hear but could feel across the distance. Poirot followed my gaze and allowed a rare glimmer of emotion to touch his gaze. "Her future, at last, secured," he murmured. I turned the conversation to more practical matters. "And the silverware?" I asked. "Returned to its rightful place, repolished with expert care, and displayed behind glass," Poirot replied. "A fitting denouement, for silver should sparkle under the eyes of all, no longer a pawn in a desperate game." We lapsed into comfortable silence as the carriage drew away. The gardens gave way to fields of gold and green, and the horizon stretched wide, promising fresh beginnings. At length, Poirot spoke again. "Ah, Hastings," he said, "I have one final remark." He paused for effect, his moustache twitching in anticipation. In every crime I investigate, the culprit inevitably underestimates two things: the power of human love and the resolve of the little grey cells. I chuckled at his characteristic flourish. Brilliant, mon ami, and undeniably true. He allowed himself a modest smile. "And now, my friend, our work here is done. Let us return to London, where new puzzles await." I settled back in my seat, grateful for the detective's counsel and the clarity he had brought to a household in turmoil. As the carriage bore us toward the horizon, I reflected on the lessons of Styles' manner. That fear can drive the noblest heart to folly, but that truth, once revealed, can heal even the deepest anguish. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold. The road ahead lay clear, a fitting symbol for the paths we forge when guided by reason and compassion. And in the gentle dusk, I heard Poirot's parting words echo in my mind. "Justice, Hastings, is no cold mechanism, but a living tapestry woven from threads of truth, mercy, and human kindness. Cherish it, and the world becomes a finer place." With that, the manor receded from view, but its lessons remained, etched into my memory like so many little grey cells at work, ever vigilant, ever compassionate, and forever ready to uncover the hidden truth.